We thank you for taking the time to attend this important event. And we hope that for those of you working with women and mothers impacted by substance use disorder, this harmful legislation in the state, find the findings from our research helpful to either consider or reconsider a punitive stance to the law or reasons to eliminate laws of this nature altogether. Sister Reach advocates for the reproductive autonomy of women and teens of color, poor and rural women, queer folks, gender nonconforming people, and their families through the framework of reproductive justice. Our mission is to empower people to lead healthy lives, raise healthy families, and live in sustainable and healthy communities. We work from a three-pronged strategy of education, policy and advocacy, and culture change work. We apply the reproductive justice framework as the bedrock of our organization, as it centers the human rights of those most vulnerable, those who are the last to be heard and are often rendered silent or ignored because of their race, class, socioeconomic status, sexual orientation, religious affiliation, immigration status, age, and in this case, unhindered access to not only birth control services, but healthcare services. The reproductive justice framework rests on 6 core principles that have been developed over the last 25 years. They state that every woman and individual has the human right to decide if and when they will have a baby and the conditions under which they will give birth, adopt, or parent. Decide if they will not have a baby and their options for preventing or ending a pregnancy. Parent the children they already have, the necessary social supports and safe environments and healthy communities, and without fear of violence from individuals or the government. The right to express sexuality and spirituality without violence or shame. A quality of life and sustainability before and beyond the ability to give birth or parent. And bodily autonomy, free from all forms of reproductive oppression, which is the control and exploitation of women, girls, and individuals through our bodies, sexuality, labor, fertility, and reproduction in violation of our human rights. For almost 8 years, we have been leveraging this important framework to shift the political, social, and public health culture around marginalized women, youth, and individuals in Tennessee and across this country. We have also committed to educating the people we serve so that they may have practical tools to thrive and be healthy while navigating their reproductive lives. In 2014, Sister Reach was invited to collaborate with the National Advocates for Pregnant Women, Healthy and Free Tennessee, and other state partners in opposition to a bipartisan-supported fetal assault bill, which aimed to reduce drug usage among pregnant women by threatening them with jail time and loss of child custody. Our specific work includes crafting reproductive justice messaging that would have educated lawmakers about the impact a bill like this would have on vulnerable women who were disproportionately poor and rural women and women of color. Though we were unable to stop the passing of the bill or the signing of that bill into law by former Governor Haslett, our work and the work of our state partners helped to halt the bill from moving beyond its sunset of 2016. Regardless of that defeat, women in Tennessee were arrested and charged with simple assault among other assaults and other charges, and were mandated to lawmaker-crafted rehabilitation models that proved unfortunately to be insufficient to curb drug addiction. This model also proved to cause great harm in destroying families, as low-income women did not have the means to navigate the courts, the Department of Children's Services, or regain custody of their children after participating in mostly subpar rehabilitation models that were not effective. The law also failed to ensure proper access to behavioral health clinics throughout the state. One of the goals of the reproductive justice framework is to develop the leadership and building the social, political, and economic power of low-income and young women of color and their communities so they can thrive and survive. For Sister Reach, that meant and still means being intentional in hearing directly from the women most impacted by substance use disorder in Tennessee, and engaging them as experts of their lives and experiences to inform the best way to support them, their families, and ultimately curb drug addiction through medical, social, and mental health support. To achieve that goal, we conducted interviews from women across the state of Tennessee who were impacted or potentially impacted by the law. This morning, you will hear from our national and international partners, our lead researcher, and other researchers who have worked on different pieces of this data. However, before we do that, it is my honor and pleasure to bring up our co-host for this morning's event, Senator Katrina Robinson, to welcome you, and then I will be back before you to take us through our program. Thank you.
So I want to thank you, Sharice, for the opportunity to help co-sponsor this event. I think it's very important that we sustain our thoughts and our works with great data and research and work behind it. A lot of times we get caught up in the emotions of politics, but really it's more about what happens in real life. So I want to make sure that everyone here is engaged and ready to take in what you have and use it to be an advocate for women's rights, for reproductive justice, and for those around you. And I'm sorry, I'll be remiss if I didn't say thank you to the men who are in the room, our brothers in the struggle. We appreciate you taking the time to come this morning. I want to tell you all about what's going to happen this week. So who all has been following the fetal heartbeat bill? Anyone? Okay, so the fetal heartbeat bill is a bill that would essentially ban abortion in Tennessee unconstitutionally. Basically, it says that if a woman or a doctor can detect a heartbeat, then the woman is no longer able to get an abortion in Tennessee. And we all know that you can detect a heartbeat, no matter how faint it is, as early as 5 to 6 weeks for a woman. So essentially, you're banning abortion in Tennessee. So that's coming up in Judiciary Committee this week, as well as the trigger ban. So basically, our legislature has decided they want to have one of two options to ban abortion. So the trigger ban is something that is subsequent to federal overturn of Roe versus Wade. With our fetal heartbeat bill, I've done a lot of work to see if we can get that stopped in the Senate. It passed in the House, but I think we're going to stop it in our Judiciary Committee this week. So I appreciate each of you all if you would take time to correspond with your legislators to let them know how you feel. And when I say how you feel, remember I just said not about emotions, but about research, about data, about money, because that's what they care about. So basically what would happen if we passed the fetal heartbeat bill would be, it would be an unconstitutional bill. And we would have to basically fight it in Supreme Court, which would cost us another $1.2 million. Just like the last bill from last session, which was a 48-hour waiting period. So now we're fighting that. We're now at $1.4 million in legal costs. So I want to make sure that you all are informed for that so that you can make those efforts to communicate with your legislators. And one thing about the legislature, it can be a tricky game. So this last week, I thought we were talking about the criminalization of women who have children who are addicted to drugs. Well, we have things called caption bills. So when someone files a caption bill, say I'm a senator and I want to file legislation, don't really know how I want it worded. So I just want to put a bookmark there. So I file a bookmark bill, which is a caption bill. And later on, I can file an amendment to make it do what I wanted to do. Now, sometimes it works two ways, because I got ready to fight in judiciary because I thought we were talking about criminalizing women for having babies who are addicted to drugs. Well, it turned out we were talking about making it illegal to have childlike sex dolls. So I know you all get in the uproar, and to be quite transparent with you, I passed on the vote because online it says criminalizing women, but in reality, the bill was a childlike sex doll. So I passed on the vote because I know some people are going to be calling my office if they saw me vote on this. But I just want you all to be aware of how it works. Sometimes, you know, you are not aware of what a bill actually does, so I want you all to know how to do that. Can I share some information with you to get to everybody that's attending here? So I'm going to send some information as to how you can follow legislation and know what happens with it, because it's very important that people who are on the ground actually do the work and contact legislators. We have to get to them before it goes to committee. And so that's the role I want to play in this fight. I want to be able to be your advocate on the Hill to make sure that you're informed and educated as to how the process goes. That's the only way we can make it work. So again, I want to apply Sister Reach for the work that you all are doing to keep everybody informed and to keep everybody engaged, to do the work to make sure that we are protecting women's rights, reproductive justice, and our communities that are disproportionately affected by such legislation. Thank you so much.
So you see we have our hands full here in the state of Tennessee. I think something that's really important that Senator Robertson lifted up, really for us, is the ways at Sister Reach that all of these bills connect to one another, right? It's important to lift up the fetal assault piece and how women have been criminalized in the state for using drugs and their babies being exposed to drugs during labor and delivery. or in utero, but it's also important to understand something that you're going to learn today is where we have issues around the fetal heartbeat bill. You'll also learn that women cross state lines to have abortions to avoid being arrested here in the state of Tennessee for having babies exposed to drugs. So we want to make sure that you understand the way that we're thinking, the way that we are connecting. Women's rights are human rights, and all of those rights still are supposed to reflect human rights, right? And if folks' human rights have been thwarted in any way, that means that folks can't access the full range of options that they have, whether or not we're talking about medical care, whether or not we're talking about behavioral health care, whether or not we're talking about abortion care. And so you're going to learn even more today in all of the research that you're going to hear, and especially the Sister Reach presentation. But before we get there, I think it's important to set the tone for what it is that we're trying to share with our city here in Memphis, and what we're trying to share with the state of Tennessee. About 3 or so weeks ago, I was invited to participate in a plenary for the AMCHIP conference. And this is a maternal health conference that is an annual conference where myself, our partners at Black Women's Health Imperative, some other advocates in the country, and Dr. Nzinga Harrison was there, not only to talk together, but Dr. Harrison was also invited to do a keynote around substance use disorder as a mental health issue. I thought it was really important, understanding that I have a family member who also struggles with substance use disorder. And never before had I heard anyone be able to articulate substance use disorder. I'm training myself to say that outside of saying drug addiction, because we've demonized and we've criminalized, and we have participated in the rhetoric that also continues to make it easy to criminalize and invisibilize people. So I'm learning for the last 3 weeks to use this language of substance use disorder, right? So that I can also not only be able to have compassion for my family member who struggles, but so that we will also help to educate all of us here in the room about why it's important to lift this particular piece up in that frame. So Dr. Nzinga Harrison is a well-respected physician and educator. Dr. Harrison is the Chief Medical Officer for UNCA Behavioral Health Incorporated. She earned her bachelor's degree in biology with Spanish and chemistry minors at Howard University, completed medical school at the University of Pennsylvania School of Medicine, and general psychiatric residency at Emory University. She is board certified in both psychiatry and addiction medicine, and has spent her career treating individuals with serious, persistent mental illness and addictive diseases. Currently, she holds adjunct faculty appointments at the Morehouse School of Medicine, Department of Psychiatry, and provides expert consulting services to the Southeast Addiction Technology Transfer Center and the Satcher Health Leadership Institute. She is co-founder of Physicians for Criminal Justice Reform Incorporated and campaign psychiatrist for Let's Get Mentally Fit, a public education and stigma reduction campaign. Let's put our hands together and let's invite Dr. Harrison to come and present to us this morning. Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you for that introduction, Sharice. I'm so honored to be here. Okay. I can put my mic back on the stand. I was going to go over there to drop my slides, but it looks like it's balanced. So I'm so happy to be here this morning because, it's like my life's work to get folks to understand substance use disorders as medical illnesses. And I think once we think about the role that the brain and the rest of physiology plays in the development of these illnesses, then it makes it easier to think about policy and advocacy and compassion for individuals that are experiencing this disorder. So I'll take the next slide, please. Thank you very much. I'm coming here on behalf of Physicians for Criminal Justice Reform, which is an organization that I co-founded. We're new, back in 2015. Our mission really is to eliminate the damaging health consequences that can arise from negative interactions with the criminal justice system. We're founded by a group of physicians, actually a friend of mine who's a neurosurgeon at the NIH, and I conceptualized the idea and then brought it to life. But we believe that changing the interaction between individuals and the criminal justice system can lead to improved health outcomes. I'll take the next slide, thank you. And so what we have made the commitment to do is to be a source of education and advocacy, research, and promoting kind of changes, both positioning ourselves as an ally to the criminal justice system and as an ally to advocates that work in the health space as well as physicians, to try to really lend a medical voice to laws that interact with health conditions. And so I'll take the next one. And so today, of course, I'm here. These are our 4 issues, and I'm just gonna highlight the top 2, which is decriminalization of mental health and addictive diseases, right? And so this law really falls under criminalization of addictive diseases. I'll take the next one. You can see the other 3 issues there. And so when I was informed about the Tennessee fetal assault law, really after Sharice and I sat on that AMCHIP panel together several weeks ago, then I immediately recognized that it is 100% based in the stigma of substance use disorders. And I'll start with my first platform, which is that substance use disorders are psychiatric disorders, are medical disorders, period. And I always say, when I say that to a crowd, if anyone wants to fight me on that, I'm ready to go. Earrings can come off, Vaseline can go on, pills can be kicked to the side. Like, we can fight about that. In medicine, when we talk about medical illnesses, and addictive diseases are chronic medical illnesses. But when we talk about medical illnesses, we characterize them based on the organ that they arise from, right? So I went to medical school, I'm a physician, my specialty is psychiatry. That means brain. I went to medical school, I did residency, I'm a cardiologist. That means heart. I went to residency, I did, medical school, went to residency, I deliver babies. That means uterus, reproductive, right? And so psychiatric disorders, a subset of which are substance use disorders or addictive diseases, arise from the brain. And what I want to do is lay a little bit of neurobiology, and I know you're like, what? Yes, genetics and neurobiology is what we're about to do. And what I hope is that you'll be able to walk out of the room and have this discussion with someone from an advocacy policy perspective. Like, let's not forget the role of the brain in this medical condition known as substance use disorder. Addiction is a fine word, but it's laden. It's laden with stigma and it's laden with a lot of emotional information. And so what we aim to do as physicians from criminal justice reform, like the senator said, is just come with data. Data, facts, and the emotion can kind of layer under it because that's how you get people to do what you need them to do, but we start with the data and the facts. So I'll take the next slide. Our learning objectives today here that you will actually understand the basic neurobiology of substance use disorders, that we'll be able to use that biology as a foundation to understand the generational effects of maternal substance use, and then develop kind of like a framework for how we can use that to feed the advocacy that we use at the legal level. I'll take the next one. And so when we look at the biopsychosocial concept of health, and I added on here cultural political. So in medicine, we learn about the biopsychosocial concept of health or the biopsychosocial concept of illness, depending which direction we look at it from. It says all illnesses, and this is just the truth, okay? All illnesses have biological factors, psychological factors, social factors, and I'm adding on cultural political factors that contribute to the development of that illness, the maintenance of that illness, the worsening of that illness, or the treatment and management of that illness, okay? Biopsychosocial, cultural, political. I think I said it AMCHIP, supercalifragilisticexpialidocious, right? Biopsychosocial, cultural, political, okay? And so if we're not considering every single one of these aspects, as a physician, I have a person sitting in front of me with a substance use disorder. If I'm not considering the biopsychosocial, cultural, political factors that are contributing to the clinical picture I see in front of me, not practicing standard of care, not being an effective physician. As an advocate, if you're not considering the biopsychosocial, cultural, political aspects of whatever issue you're advocating for, you're not being an effective advocate. As a lawmaker, if you're not considering the biopsychosocial, you hear this repetition? That's so that you'll walk out of here and be able to say to somebody else, okay? The biopsychosocial, social, cultural factors that are contributing to whatever law you are making, then you're not being an effective lawmaker, right? we look at all of these domains so that we can try not to make things worse because of our blind spots. And so what this law does is ignore the biological. It also ignores psychosocial, cultural, and political. But it certainly ignores the biological, and so that creates a blind spot that leads to harm to women, which is the research that Sister Reach has done. So when we look at biological really splits into two arms. If I walk away from the mic, can you still hear me? Okay, because I'm a little like ADD, and so standing in one spot is like physically uncomfortable for me, okay? So biological splits into two arms. You have genetic, you're born with it. That's in your DNA. You have acquired, you get it somewhere along the way during your life, okay? So we know that substance use disorders have a large heritability, a large genetic component. You're just born with the risk. We're gonna get to it on the next slide, okay? So the way we look for that is family history. So like I have a hardcore, it's funny, I went to medical school to be a surgeon, which I love surgery, but I also love sleep, so that didn't work out. I was like, I'm a mean person. I need to go to sleep. Like when I didn't see the sun for 2 straight months, I was like, I don't think it's gonna work for me. Anyway, I went to medical school to be a surgeon. Now that I'm a psychiatrist, I can see how I became a psychiatrist. Because I have a ton of psychiatric illness and substance use disorder in my family, even though the family dynamic was to hide that, right? Okay? So even though the family dynamic was to hide that, my DNA is my DNA. And so what do I tell my kids? Listen, your friends might be able to do a line of coke. You? Your DNA is not gonna let you do it. Okay? Your friends might be able to smoke some weed. You are gonna get schizophrenic if you smoke some weed. Okay, my kids have already been hearing this story from the time they were 3 or 4 years old because they are genetically loaded for psychiatric disorders and specifically for substance use disorders. Now, an acquired biological risk you get along the way. So you're minding your own business, you get in a car accident, you get some serious injury, a doctor writes you a prescription for pain medication, right? You didn't even realize you were so stressed and anxious before you got in that car accident, and opiates don't only treat physical pain, they treat emotional pain. And so you take that first pain pill, and yes, the pain from your physical injury goes away, but also the pain from your emotional injuries goes away. And now you have an acquired biological risk factor for opioid use disorder. Now, let somebody else in your family already had been addicted to drugs, so now you have a combined genetic risk and acquired risk. That's biological, you got it. Psychological is all about the experiences that you've had, okay? And it starts, so in utero, your experiences, when you're the infant, that's really conferring acquired biological risk to you, okay? Every single experience we have in the body turns into an electrical signal or a chemical signal, right? So we tend to underestimate how much of our behavior is actually biological, how much of our decision making is actually biological, when in reality it's 100%. Like your brain and your body does not do anything without first some electrical or chemical signal happening in your neurological system, okay? So psychologically, instability from when you're born coming all the way up not only forms the way you see the world, which is the psychological aspect of it, but also informs the way your brain develops, informs the way the rest of the physiology in your body develops. And so for children who are born into unstable environments, basic needs not met, nurturing not met, stability, stability, stability. It's really all about predictability and stability, right? When you're raised in a stable environment, your physiology develops in a stable way. When you're raised in an unstable environment, your physiology is chaotic, okay? And chaotic physiology is expressed behaviorally and emotionally, difficult relationships, life instability, right? And we start thinking to ourselves, oh, that person is just choosing, or if they were a better person, but we forget those adverse childhood experiences and whatever life experiences you've had from childhood all the way up to adulthood form your perspective for the world, fed by your biology, okay? And so the more unstable early lifehood experiences are, the higher the risk for developing a substance use disorder. Lay that on top of our folks that are biologically loaded for substance use disorder are at higher risk for being born into an environment that's unstable. So now we've compounded it. Socially, okay? Socially, we are pack animals, period. This is a pack. Like you're running with the reproductive pack. Okay? We pack together along with people that look like us, that smell like us, pheromones, that believe like us. Okay? We are pack animals. And what happens to an animal when it gets kicked out of the pack?
It's sick. It dies.
It gets sick and dies. I'm pretty sure that's what you said, but it was just hearing. Okay? The animal gets sick and it dies. What do we do via stigma for humans with substance use disorder? Okay? That's what this bill does. Right? It doesn't say you have it doesn't say you have breast cancer, we're gonna wrap all the resources we possibly have around you while you're pregnant, because we can imagine what that would be like and try to make sure you make it through this alive, and so does your child. We don't do that. We say you have substance use disorder. Kick you out of the healthcare system into the criminal justice system. Right? And so when you kick somebody out of the pack, they die. I don't think the motivation for the legislators was to kill pregnant women and their babies. I think the opposite. But this blind spot is leading to that. Okay? And then cultural, political, of course, this goes into psychology, this goes into biology, coming up in the environment, in the political climate, in the cultural climate, all of that informs risk for substance use disorder. And so when we're thinking about advocacy and laws, we have to think in all of these components. I'll take the next one. Sorry, go back just 1 second, because I specifically wanted to say these words. Stigma, racism, discrimination, marginalization, criminalization. I put them up there because I knew I'd get going. So I just want to make sure to say that. Okay, next slide. So when we look at, I started out by saying, I will fight you if you try to say addictive diseases are not chronic medical conditions. And so this is how I'm going to prove it to you. Anybody want to refute asthma, diabetes, and hypertension as chronic medical conditions? Okay. So the heritability factor is the amount of risk that you're born with because of your DNA, biology. We figured out a bunch of different ways in medicine. But look at this. We get so confused for psychiatric disorders, substance use disorders specifically, because we think people are choosing to have a specific behavior, right? Because our personalities are the way we think, the way we talk, the way we interact, how we feel about things, and somehow we just think it's just all completely just voluntary and you just choose to do that. But in reality, the brain, what is the brain's job? Okay, let me not start with the brain. I forgot to start with the rules, which is like, if I ask a question, I expect y'all to be yelling out answers. Okay, so now the rule has been given so that all can comply. And so, what is your heart's job? Just yell it out. Pump blood, okay? I promise not to ask any trick questions. Unlike my son, that's his goal in life, is to trip me up. But the goal of your heart is to pump blood, right? What's the job of your lungs? Breathe, okay? What's the job of your intestines? Make food. Anyway. My adolescent sons hate me. Anyway, when your heart is having trouble, how do you know? You feel pain. When your lungs are having trouble, how do you know? Shortness of breath. When your bowels are having trouble, how do you know? You come out of both ends, right? The brain's job is thinking, feeling, making decisions, acting in response to those thoughts, feelings, and decisions. Okay? And command central, control the rest of your body. Like, that's important, but I put it back, right? So when you're having trouble, your symptoms are gonna be along that spectrum. Your thinking's gonna go. Your emotions are gonna go. Your decision making's gonna go. Your behaviors are gonna follow all of those three that went, right? And so we think to ourselves like, that person's just being a douchebag, when really it's the brain letting you know, I'm having trouble performing my essential functions. okay? And so when we look at the DNA loading, the brain is the brain is more special if you ask me than other organs, but I'm biased. But in really, we look at the data, the brain is no different from the other organs. So addiction, that means 34 to 61% of your risk for developing a substance use disorder is coded in your DNA. Did it shock you? 34 to 61%, right? Look at asthma, 36 to 70%. That's basically equal statistically. Look at diabetes type 1, less heritable than substance use disorder. That means the environment is playing a bigger role in the development of diabetes and hypertension than it is in addiction. But we don't carry the same stigma for those because we don't think people are choosing to have diabetes. And we don't think people are choosing to have hypertension or choosing to have asthma when this data would tell us there's more of a choice. There's more of a lifestyle component to hypertension than there is to substance use disorder. And so should we take people who are genetically vulnerable and kick them out of the pack? When we've laid them in an environment, so what we can do with the environment, that means if I take the higher number, let's say 61% of substance use disorder is DNA. That means I have 39% I can try to be using to protect people. Psychosocial, cultural, political, cultural, right? 39%. What I do with that 39% either makes this 61% risky or less risky. And so when you're born into poverty, we're adding to your 61%, right? When you're born into a school system that sees you as a criminal by the time you're 9, we're adding to this 60%. When you're born into a state that says, because you developed an illness that you were biologically vulnerable to, I'm gonna put you in jail, we bolster that system. And so what we wanna do is to be advocating and creating policies and laws that mitigate that 61% DNA risk. I'll take it. Oh, it's just cut off. So when we look at the neurobiology of substance use disorders and other mental health disorders, it's shared because it's the brain, right? We're really talking about two main systems, the limbic system and the dopamine system. Now here's the first thing I want you to learn. We're gonna do a little call and response. Your prefrontal cortex is right underneath your forehead, of your skull, right? Your prefrontal cortex is your CEO. That's where your decision making and your impulse control is. That's where voluntary things, conscious, voluntary, like I'm gonna decide to, okay? Cortex. When we look into the deep brain, like if you connect these two lines that I'm drawing right in the center of my skull, of my brain there, that's the deep brain. That's what we share with all animals. That's your impulses, your instincts. You don't have to think about breathing to stay alive, or like you're all like really listening to me and then you'd be like, oh snap, I didn't breathe, and then you're dead, right? That's like the automatic stuff, okay? Our emotions and our impulses are in the automatic part of our brain. That's the deep brain. So when I say deep brain, that's automatic. When I say cortex, that's voluntary, okay? Deep brain, automatic. Cortex, automatic. Cortex, automatic. Deep brain, you got it, okay? Deep brain is thinking. Sorry, scratch that. Cortex is thinking. My deep brain got a hold of me. When you say Freudian slip, that's deep brain, okay? Your cortex is thinking. Your deep brain is emotions. So remember, cortex, voluntary, thinking. Deep brain, automatic, emotions, okay? With both of these systems are in the deep brain. The limbic system, the dopamine system. Dopamine system has become called the reward pathway. I don't use that language at all. I love that Sharice mentioned the power of words. We don't even recognize what we're conveying sometimes when we talk. The reward pathway, because dopamine pathway intimately involved in substance use disorders. The reward pathway makes it seem like people get addicted to drugs because it's a reward. Because there's something fun about having your entire life ruined and decimated by drug addiction, right? So we just gonna kick reward pathway right out the back. Now what it is the motivation pathway. So phylogenetically, look all the way back. when the brain was developing, the dopamine pathway is what keeps you alive. Okay? The natural determinants of dopamine: food, water, sex, nurturing. Okay? It are all of those things that are needed for the individual organism and the species to propagate. The limbic system is all about emotions. So you can see we have abnormalities of the limbic system. We get mood disorders, anxiety disorders, ADHD, psychotic disorders. We get abnormality of the dopamine system. We get addictive diseases. I'll take the next slide. So this is a picture of the brain. This is the limbic system, the main structures that are part of the limbic system. Remember, limbic system? Emotions. Okay? Dopamine pathway, motivation to live. The limbic system, emotions. I'm going to start at the bottom, your olfactory bulb. That's your sense of smell. Smell is the strongest provocateur of memory. Okay? It happens automatically. So what happens is your CEO, your frontal cortex, and you see it there at the top, your frontal lobe. Your CEO is constantly getting information from internal stimulus and information for external stimulus. Deciding what that information means, and then figuring out what behavior you're going to take as a result of that information. It's all electrical, it's all chemical, okay? The olfactory bulb, you're walking down the street, you say, I need to go see grandma. And you're like, why do I need to go to grandma? It's because you went by a bakery and you smelled some apple pie, and grandma's house used to smell like apple pie. And the olfactory bulb sent apple pie to the hippocampus, which is memory, which sends that information to the prefrontal cortex and said, apple pie reminds me of grandma, and I haven't seen grandma in a long time. We need to make a plan to go see grandma. All of it happened outside of your consciousness. The first thought you grabbed on in that whole long process was, I need to go see grandma. Right? This is how it happens. My patients tell me I'm minding my own business. I've been in recovery 3 years. I smell something that smells like crack burning. I'm craving. Right? And the reason they're craving is because we started at the bottom, olfactory bulb. Then we have thalamus and hypothalamus. Thalamus and hypothalamus. Just hypo because it's under the thalamus. Okay? So I say the brain and the body speak two different languages, Spanish and Portuguese. Although it's all the same nerves and all the same chemicals, Spanish and Portuguese, similar, not the same. Right? You need a translator. And so the hypothalamus on the bottom translate body signals into the brain's language, and the thalamus on top translate brain signals into body language. So you know you get butterflies in your stomach when you're anxious? Thalamus was like, I'm anxious. Hypothalamus was like, belly, we're anxious. Belly was like, right? Even if you're not anxious and your heart starts racing, you'll start to feel anxious because the heart starts racing, and then hypothalamus says, thalamus, heart's racing. And thalamus says, prefrontal cortex, heart's racing. And prefrontal cortex says, that means we're anxious. Okay? This is the connection. And so, I'll take the next slide. An amygdala I want to talk about. Amygdala is the seat of fear and anxiety. That's all you need. Amygdala, just think about horror movies. That's amygdala, okay? So then I'll take the next one. We go to the dopamine pathway. I already told you, motivation to survive. Food, water, sex, nurturing. What you'll notice is that the dopamine pathway is a 3-neuron pathway. It starts in the deep brain, voluntary or automatic.
Automatic.
Okay. And then the second neuron is still in the deep brain, voluntary or automatic.
Automatic.
And then the last step, prefrontal cortex. So much has happened before it gets to the prefrontal cortex where we can actually make a decision about it. So imagine this. The size of the dopamine signal and how much dopamine is around and how long it stays around is the only information the dopamine pathway uses to determine how important that signal is. How big is the signal, how much dopamine is around? It's chemical, okay? So, food, water, sex, nurturing can give you a dopamine signal. Okay, it's like whatever, way back in the day, you're like in the jungle with your coconuts and your loincloth, right? And you like haven't had anything to eat and you're starving. And then you see a gazelle. And you're like, dopamine pathway is like, oh snap, Food. Sends a signal forward to prefrontal cortex. We need that food. Make a plan to get it and make sure we never go without it again. Okay? The dopamine signal raised by that is like, bing, light bulb, food. We need it to survive. Now, super signal, cocaine. In relation to that light bulb, it's the brightness of the sun. In terms of the size of the dopamine signal that it generates. Actually, in the lab, it generates 10 to the 9th amount of dopamine compared to food, water, sex, nurture. So which one's more important? Not psychologically in life, feelings and all that. Just biologically, which one is more important? Cocaine or food? Cocaine or water? Cocaine or sex? Cocaine or nurturing, which is your family? So y'all just gonna choose cocaine. That's what we think. That's what we think. Because you suck as a person. I mean, am I lying? Some people lie, right? Dopamine chose cocaine.
That's right.
Because what happened is that dopamine signal came in the prefrontal cortex. The CEO was like, oh, snap. This will keep us alive. Make a plan to make sure we never go without it. Every single drug of abuse, every single behavior of abuse runs through the dopamine pathway in that way, okay? And so what we know is that the dopamine pathway in the limbic system, which is where your fight or flight is, was designed to keep us alive. So the way your brain works is that your prefrontal cortex does not refute information that comes from your limbic system and your dopamine pathway. Because you don't have time for that. Again, you're in your coconuts and your loincloth, and you see a lion, and the amygdala is like, fight or flight, right? The prefrontal cortex, well, I don't know, because the lion is faster than you, so it's actually hard. But the prefrontal cortex doesn't have time to say, well, amygdala, I know that's a lion, but, like, this is not the time for pontification. And so the prefrontal cortex, the way your brain develops is that the prefrontal cortex takes information from the limbic system, from the dopamine system, and just accepts it and acts on it, period. When you get a stimulus, an external stimulus and internal stimulus, your deep brain registers a somatic, a body response, an emotional response to that in 500 milliseconds. It takes another 1,000 milliseconds for that to get to the prefrontal cortex. So for 1,000 seconds, you're completely involuntary automatic. What we can do is train the CEO to question the information that's coming from the limbic system and the dopamine pathway. And that's what we do in treatment, right? So when they smell, walking down the street, mind their own business, they smell that weed, and the dopamine pathway sends a signal to the prefrontal cortex and says, oh man, remember weed used to keep us alive? Get some right now, make a plan to never go without it. We've trained the prefrontal cortex to say, wait a minute, perhaps this is not the right decision. Like, this is not a lion. I don't have to just take this information for gold, okay? Take the next slide, please. And so, if we look at that biology as a foundation, and we talk about the generational effects that substance use disorder has on families, and this is bio, psycho, social, cultural, political, okay? Psychosocial, cultural, political, that's on all of us. We created the systems, we created the environment that is aggravating our genetic burden for substance use disorders, okay? But important concept I want to put here is epigenetics. So epigenetics, we know that stress actually changes DNA. And that changed DNA is passed to the next generation, okay? We know that maternal substance use actually changes DNA. And that DNA is passed down to the next generation. So not only are we increasing our genetic vulnerability generation to generation in these vulnerable populations, we're writing laws like this that increase the psychosocial, cultural, political vulnerability. And then we wonder why things are getting worse. Like war on drugs was actually war on human beings. right? We have the opiate crisis right now because we're biopsychosocially, cultural, politically loading the odds against ourselves, against members of our own pack, right? I'll take the next slide. And so when we look at the framework that we want to really talk to our lawmakers and teachers, I mean just everybody, whatever, if you're a human, you qualify, I want to talk to you about it, is thinking about the biology, the psychology, the sociology, the politicology, and the culturality, okay? All of them. All of them. We have to be able to have that entire discussion if we're talking about human beings, because we start, I think, with the biology of it, we undermine the stigma, and when we undermine the stigma, that allows us to be kind of compassionate and solution focused when we're doing our advocacy and development. So that's all I got. That's it. I know. I can let you know the conversation.
Let's give it up again for Dr. Harrison. Now do you see why I want her to come and present to you? Because for us, it's important to make sure that, like I said, that we set the tone for all of what you're going to learn today first as a healthcare issue, right? The other piece for us as a reproductive justice organization in doing that means to decenter the criminalization pieces around this and center the actual people who have to navigate the healthcare issue that we're talking about, right? So we want to open the floor for a question and Q&A, but a couple things kind of lifted up for me before we pass the mic to some of you. But let me, by a show of hands, are there any questions that I know that are going to be coming? Anybody who wants to ask something? Or maybe something will spark. If so, just, okay. So we'll get to you, Wendy. Horisha's going to come to you. Okay, so, all right, Dr. Harrison. All right. I knew it was going to be the bomb, and I knew that it was going to be amazing. And like I said, I have my own family member, and I appreciate you saying that basically so many of us, and I definitely think about those of us who are Black or brown, people of color, who just thinking about the history of this country, the political climate of the country, kind of what that's done as far as drugs even making it into our neighborhoods in the first place, because I think the other piece here, Sister Reach, is that we want to make sure that we connect all of this to the history of what we've all had to navigate in this country to understand how we kind of got here today, right? And I remember my family, though we are not Memphis natives, my folks are originally from Detroit. And my mother talks about what happened after Dr. King was murdered and how drugs basically were placed into the Detroit area, right? And she also talks about the fact that my grandmother, my grandfather are from this area. My grandmother's from Olive Branch, Mississippi. My grandfather is from Bailey Station, which basically what we know is Collierville. And so, and them not even recognizing, even when herself, as a young woman coming up in Detroit, would come home after she maybe enjoyed some marijuana, they had no idea what was going on with her, right? And so then I think about where we are in the state of Tennessee, and potentially culturally what that has meant for us as a place of faith, being in the Bible Belt, maybe the ways, the lenses that we have potentially used in order to try to see or understand this. So I think I want to offer compassion in the fact that culturally we have been socialized to think certain ways about drug usage, right? Around in conjunction with our spirituality. It's very important to lift those pieces up. It's easier to criminalize what we think is demonic. It is easier to criminalize what we think is, something that someone has done by choice, right? And so I think that Dr. Harrison has made an important case for us to take that, throw that away, right? And one thing that we recognized even in 2014, when we initially were fighting the first bill, and I think also, let me just say this too, I think what Senator Robinson was trying to tell us, because even I didn't get it until she sat here and showed it to me while Dr. Harrison was speaking, because the language of the law changed, that basically means that the legislators who were trying to push the law stopped, right? That's a good thing for us. That means that the effort around the particular legislation has been tabled. What I can pray is that in the meantime, in between time, first of all, we've got our senator here. She's been able to hear this herself. She's able to take this back on the Hill and to offer some education and some guidance to her own peers around this piece, right? So we're already ahead of the game with Senator Robinson being in this room with us. But it's also important for us to make sure that when she goes back, that she's able to have all of the kind of tools around the language, and especially even including reproductive justice language, even including healthcare language, even understanding this term that I'm going to lift up that in the feminist and womanist worlds we use a lot, intersectionality, right? Which is basically when Dr. Harrison starts talking about the bio, social, cultural, political, psycho factors, those intersectional issues that are going on in the lives of people that perpetuate the choices that they make. So I think that's where I want to begin with you, to really lift up intersectionality. And the way that we teach it is that it is a concept used in critical theories to describe ways in which oppressive institutions, including race, class, gender, are interconnected and cannot be examined separately from one another. I think that you made the case, but I just want to give you an opportunity to maybe say more about the importance for us to really lead with compassion here in the state of Tennessee around this healthcare issue, right? So I'm gonna hand you the mic.
Okay, thank you. So I actually always start these types of answers out not in psychiatry or not in addiction medicine, because it's easier for us to develop compassion for non-psychiatric, non-addictive medical diseases, right? And so think about a woman who has breast cancer. Like, let's generate the same law for a woman who has breast cancer, which is a relapsing, remitting illness, just like substance use disorder is. Let's say as long as you don't have an active cancer while you're pregnant, you don't have to worry about criminal justice involvement. But if your cancer comes back, unless you go to treatment and successfully finish treatment, we're gonna criminalize you and put you in jail. It doesn't make sense, does it? Right? And when you think about the treatment in terms of intersectionality for breast cancer treatment, right? We know biologically they type your cancer, they give you chemo, they give you radiation, but what they also do, send a nurse to your house. What do they also do? Make sure you have enough food. What do they also do? Ronald McDonald House, make sure your family has a place to stay while you're in the hospital, right? What do they also do? They make sure you get FMLA for as much time as you need it from work, right? This is intersectionality. This is saying we know we cannot treat breast cancer without the biology, for chemo or radiation. Without the psychology, you automatically get a health navigator and a counselor when you have breast cancer treatment, right? To help you, they automatically connect you to support groups to help you through the emotional component of it. We know you need your support system, so we're working with Ronald McDonald to make sure they can be around. We know you have to eat, and so if you don't have enough food, we connect you to resources. We know you need income coming in, so we advocate for you with your employer, right? This is the approach that we need. We need a breast cancer approach to substance use disorder. They have mastered the intersectional approach, and it's because there is no judgment involved in developing breast cancer. We don't say you got that cancer because you chose to. And that's what we do for folks that develop a substance use disorder. You're addicted to drugs because you chose to, right? And in reality, we can look at breast cancer, the inputs there, also like all of these things that can increase risk for getting breast cancer, and they figured out how to try to address those things on the other side. And so one I have found successful strategy is to say, well, let's say we weren't talking about substance use disorder. Let's say we were talking about diabetes or breast cancer. Breast cancer is always going to automatically and appropriately generate a large amount of empathy. And I think if we could get to the point where we say breast cancer, that same level of empathy when we say substance use disorder or addiction, we would be in a different climate.
Okay, so you said something else that was really great to me, the family dynamic, being to hide, which I just put in parentheses, I paraphrase the pain, right? I think that, this is not just a black or brown problem, we know that. This is not, just a black people problem, this is not just a person of color problem. First of all, we recognize that the March of Dimes raised this to the top So let's give a shout out to the March of Dimes for really trying to figure out ways to support the mothers that they were supporting, right? To make sure that lawmakers had an idea that women were struggling on this level, especially in East Tennessee, which is really where a lot of this came from initially, which is where we see the highest rates of opioid usage, right, and substance use disorder around this particular drug, right? But I think that one of the things that we did when we were fighting in 2014 was to get community response, and one of our local news anchors did kind of a roundabout in Memphis, for example, like, you know, what do you think? How do you feel? What do you think? And people more than not had compassion, right? But I still think that, and I say this as somebody, like I said, who has my own family member who struggles with substance use disorder, and it gets on my nerves. Can we just be real about it?
Yeah.
Like, it's hurtful.
It is.
It pisses me off. I wish that it was different. It has impacted my individual life as well as the life of our family, right? And we wish that it were different, but it's not, right? And so I think, you know, something that that I said to you when I first came in this morning, I was just like, you know, you really helped me, you healed me, you know, like, you have no idea what you did. But I do think it's important to speak to the room and speak to folks who are looking on Facebook and folks who will see this video after the fact. Our folks at ACOG TV who are here filming us, because this is also going to tell we're taking this across the road, y'all. We're taking it on the road. This is important. This can't just be a Memphis issue. The state of Tennessee, this particular legislation changed the way that folks in the country crafted legislation around criminalization, around drug usage and criminalizing mothers. It's important for us to have conversations at the house, right? So I would love for you to speak to potentially some of the good things that have come from family support, community support, for even some of your own patients.
Sure. Actually, for any medical illness,
Yes.
family support is one of the number one predictors of who does well. The next level for that is community support, right? And so being welcomed into a pack instead of being kicked out of a pack. And so I want to underscore what you said. Substance use disorders are devastating disorders. They devastate the individual involved, they devastate the loved ones, they devastate the community. But the same is true for cancer, right? The difference is that all of the pain and suffering that cancer brings to your loved ones, we direct that at the cancer. And for substance use disorders, the pain and the suffering, we direct it at the person who is affected by the illness, right? So it's just, I mean, it seems like a small distinction, but it's huge to direct it at the person, then you're mad at the person. And you retaliate against the person as opposed to being mad at the illness and you retaliate against the illness. I cannot say enough when we're trying to mitigate this DNA, this biological component. You have to be able to create in your family, one, you just have to talk about it, right? And so my favorite uncle growing up, as I was younger, like I knew whenever he came over to the house, and I love this about my family, nobody ever gets kicked out of the pack, period. I knew growing up that when he came to the house, everybody hid their purses like behind locked doors. I didn't know that it was because he had severe cocaine use disorder and would steal everyone's money on his way out the door, right? And so if that had just been, your uncle is sick with this illness, but we will never kick him out of the family. We are trying to wrap around him as much as possible. And this is one of the ways we try to help him get better, right? Instead of just saying, you can't come because we have to protect our persons over you, we just lock the persons and say, you can come. That would have been, that would have been a life-changing message, right? The compassion to just be able to say, as severe as this illness is, we're mad at the illness, not at him. That's why he will always come for Christmas. He will always come for Thanksgiving. And so if we can start kind of, because when you hide, like I love AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, and I love it, they do amazing things. I wish it didn't have to be anonymous. Because the anonymous is stigma.
Yeah.
The anonymous is like you have to hide that you have this illness because of the way that people will treat you, which is true. So what if we could just be like, you don't have to hide, right? You can just come here and the world is gonna wrap our arms around you. So if we can stop hiding it, because that drives the stigma that it's something to be ashamed of, when it's really just like, your biopsychosocial factors came together this way, so now what can we do to help you get in remission and stay in remission?
When you hear it, then the sister here.
Okay.
I'm taking no responsibility for this order.
Okay, I'm Wendy Bach. First of all, wow, that was amazing. That was so amazing. I feel like I've read things like that, but like hearing you say it the way you said it, I can't even tell. It was amazing. And so I want to locate my question a little bit. So I have been researching this a lot and talking to tons of people in East Tennessee about what is happening in the court systems. And sort of medical fact, right, gets wielded very aggressively in this conversation. And so I'm hoping you can help me with a couple of things. I think, many of the things, I've heard a lot of like, this is a medical fact and therefore X we have to do, right? The first, I want you to talk a little bit more about epigenetics and the effect of exposure in utero, because there's a lot of really aggressive statements about what that means and what that means about what we have to do in the law. So epigenetics is one, and the second is neonatal abstinence syndrome. My understanding of the literature is that it's a short-term treatable condition, and we have very little information about, if any at all, about what's next. But I wanted to sort of put those two questions to you
Sure.
and ask you if you can help me have these conversations.
Sure. So, to take the perspective of the lawmakers that are aggressively wielding those facts, they're saying, and this is why we have to protect the fetus.
Right.
Which I don't think any of us would disagree that we want to try to protect fetuses and infants, right? And so, if we had our choice, mothers would not use during pregnancy. If we had our choice, mothers would not have diabetes during pregnancy. Mothers would not develop cancer during pregnancy. Mothers would not get life-threatening infections during pregnancy, right? And so we can all agree on that. Epigenetics, one of the more common kind of mechanisms by which that happens, is less so than in utero use and more so stress. Okay? So stress actually changes the way, because we're just constantly replenishing our whatever, I don't want to get too deep in it, but you're putting methyl on some molecules and then that changes the way the proteins fold and that changes the way they send their messages. Stress is one of the biggest epigenetic risk factors that we have, okay? And so if we want to use epigenetics as our defender, then it is, we have to mitigate the stress that we're subjecting mothers to, okay? And you mitigate that stress before they get pregnant. You certainly try to mitigate that stress while they're pregnant, then you have to mitigate that stress after they're pregnant as well. And so a law like this, where women feel like they have to flee across borders because their substance use disorder, their prefrontal cortex is not to the point that it can refute their deep brain, and they use drugs while they're pregnant. And if you talk to any mother, they will tell you they have the motivation not to use while they're pregnant. It just becomes impossible as a result of biological and psychosocial factors, right? And so if we really want to undermine epigenetic changes during pregnancy, we have to address the environment, and then we back our way into creating an environment that mitigates their biological risk factors for relapse. The second thing, neonatal abstinence syndrome, you're correct, is short-lived. We know how to manage it. The majority of babies do fine. That does not appreciate the fact, though, that just like certain medications I won't use in pregnancy, similarly with illicit drug use in pregnancy, even though that specific syndrome is short-lived, there can be longer-term neuropsychiatric changes that we see in these children. What is difficult to tease apart from that is what part of that is because they were exposed in utero, unless it's alcohol, in which case fetal alcohol syndrome is very well characterized and yet doesn't draw the same amount of stigma and ire as illicit drug use, but that's because Americans love alcohol, okay? And so even though alcohol and cigarettes are two of the most dangerous substances that we have, you don't see a cigarette use in pregnancy criminalization bill, so that goes to the cultural, political aspects of it. But we we know that there can be longer term behavioral, emotional changes in children who've been in utero while mom was using. The issue is that it's difficult to tease that apart from the environment that they're born into, right? So the environment that they're born into actually drives the risks for those same behaviors and cognitive, shortfalls, and so it's kind of difficult. And so what I would say for people who are wielding those facts like a weapon, try to introduce the nuance, but just start with the motivation. We have the same goal, which is to protect babies. We have the additional goal to protect mothers, right? And so the way we do that is a more nuanced way because we're actually increasing risk with this law. We're increasing epigenetic stress burden with this law, right? So you use that fact to let them know how their law is falling short on that. Did that help?
A lot, thank you.
Greg Blumenthal in Great Addiction Care. Want to see how you feel about this. SUD is a chronic disease, like diabetes.
Correct.
Someone who is diabetic even on that day, that moment, that their blood sugar just happens to be normal.
That is correct.
That there is no guarantee that the next moment their blood sugar is going to cease to be, that it's going to be normal again, but there is guarantee that they need to be treated as diabetic for the rest of their lives.
Preach it to the choir.
SUD, even when they do not have a single molecule of whatever substance is the issue, they are still SUD patients. They still need to be treated as for this chronic disease.
So I'm gonna take your language and I'm gonna take your concept 100% and I'm gonna tweak your language just a bit. They don't need to be treated as SUD patients. They need to be treated as human beings that have substance use disorder. And I am such a stickler, right? Like I don't want you, when you walk out of here, I don't want you to call anybody an addict if that is a person with addiction, right? Because person first. But I'm taking your concept, it is as, I say that all the time, so it's like you were reading my notes before I came in here, okay? For any chronic medical condition, just because your blood pressure is controlled right now because you're exercising, taking your hydrochlorothiazide, and doing your yoga and keeping your stress low, doesn't mean you don't have hypertension. And guess what? So you notice there that I did biopsychosocial real quick on you, right? I did medicine, I did exercise, which is social, I did keeping your stress low, okay? Your relationships are good, psychological. Your blood pressure is low. As soon as your stress goes up, guess what? As soon as you stop taking your hydrochlorothiazide, guess what? As soon as your husband starts stressing you out, guess what? Okay, so the formula has to be in place, and like he said, 100%, I'm magnifying your content right now. The formula has to be in place. So that's what's wrong with the second part of this bill that says if mom gets in treatment and successfully completes treatment, then she won't be criminalized, right? One, everybody doesn't have the same access to treatment. Two, just like you know your blood pressure is high and you don't go to the doctor, sometimes it's hard to get people in treatment, right? Three, just because she finished a 5-day detox or a 30-day residential doesn't mean the job is done. The formula has to stay in place. And that's what we have to think longitudinally about the environmental aspects. I'll just use that to be all of my last syllables after biological, right? We have to manage those along with managing the biological risk for a lifetime. Thank you.
How you doing?
Yeah, great. How are you doing?
I'm all right. This is something new for me, and I want to ask a question pertaining to fetal heartbeat and the substance use disorder. And you already have a policy in effect, and if so, are you all planning on changing that policy? You know, make some changes to it, or you all try to go to court?
Well, so what Senator Robinson was educating us on this morning is that the two legislators in the Senate and the House who initially supported the bill have decided to halt it for now. That's the blessing, right? That's something that I didn't even recognize had happened in the midst of, because I've been traveling for about 8 days. So that's a good thing. What I hope that this research would have done, I mean, in a perfect world, Dr. Bowers and I we were trying so hard to get it completed by last year, because we knew that somebody would potentially try to offer it up as legislation again. Former Senator Tate, who used to hold the seat that Senator Robinson currently holds, tried last legislative term to push the law, but he didn't get a co-signer, right? So I guess to kind of answer your question on like maybe what next steps look like is, and I'm not sure what brings you to the event today, but if you are an advocate, if you are a provider, if you are with the Department of Children's Services, I think that one of the things that Dr. Harrison is trying to lift up is that it is important for you to also be a part of us never seeing this law happen again, because it's going to take our folks on the ground to educate lawmakers about what actually happens to people in real life, in real time, when they are navigating substance use disorder. Whether or not, if you are Department of Children's Services, you already know that she has high stress because she's about to lose her kid. If she is black or brown and she is living in Memphis, Tennessee, more than likely she doesn't even have a family member who can take her kid. If she lives in this city, she may not have the financial means. If she is the one who needs care, we just took the breadwinner out of the house and put her in care, which means now she has to face eviction. Now she potentially has lost her job. Now she potentially has lost her kids long term. So it's so important that each one of us play our part, do our role in this work to make sure. If you are the lawyer, right? I think one of the things that we learned even in 2014 was that our legal counsel were undereducated about how to properly advocate as counsel for these patients, right? And so that meant that we had somebody who would still go to prison. And potentially, there are women who are yet in prison right now, which is what you'll hear from Dr. Bowers. Everybody couldn't participate because everybody wasn't even available to participate, right? That the law still stands, even though the law sunset in 2016, if you were arrested on June the 30th, 2016. You know what I'm saying? You still have to deal with the repercussions of the law up until however long you finish that piece. I think it's something else to lift up here is what it really looks like for poor people to navigate court costs and fees and probation officers. We appreciate Senator Akbari when she was still in the House as our state rep, working so hard to make sure that we had a reduction in expungement rates and things of that nature. But these folks also got to go get a job. One of the things that we learned was the expectation of the mandate around this law is that not only did that mother have to, was she mandated to some form of care, whether it be detox or a program, she also was mandated to get a job and live in a halfway house in some instances, and she had to figure her way out, right? I'm gonna lift up a sister, the first black woman in this city who was arrested was Jamila Falls. Wherever she may be, God bless her, because she really showed us what the disparity looked like. Ms. Falls not only was arrested after being 21 days on the run after she had her baby at Regional 1. She finally turned herself in, right? She was mandated to a detox program, and then she was routed into a halfway house. Now, I know some of the intimate details of that because we were on the front lines of the interviews and the messaging. And so she called us, right? What she called me and said was, Ms. Sharice, I'm here at a halfway house in North Memphis, and there's drugs all around me. And they expect me to leave this halfway house and go get a job and not get high between here and the job. They also expect me to get to the job, and there is no means for me to get from the halfway house, because I don't have no money to get from the halfway house to the job. Let's go back to epigenetics, right? I'm so glad I'm learning these terms, right? And so we expect folks to do the possible in the impossible circumstance, right? This is what I'm saying about the state of Tennessee and why it makes absolutely no sense for us to shame and blame and demonize people for the health care that they're navigating, right? We've got to be able to humanize people for once and for all. Nobody wakes up and says, you know what, I'm gonna be a crackhead. I know I hurt my baby. Nobody's doing that. right? So for us, we've got to have folks on the front line, and we invited as many folks as we knew to invite. We can't be responsible if folks did not find this particular information to be important to be here. We appreciate all of you who have come, but we should have a line out of the door with as much information and as much rah-rah as we've seen around opioid usage in the country. Jeff Sessions, former Jeff Sessions came here to have a conversation with our mayor about bringing more money in the city to fight the war on drugs. Which drugs do we think we was talking about? We're talking about opioids, but in Memphis, we're talking about marijuana, we're talking about cocaine, you know what I'm saying? And because of the way that the law was crafted, even if she had a car accident, she could go to jail if her baby was injured, right? So we have also conditioned ourselves in the state of Tennessee to no longer care for the woman. Because down here in the South, we have absolutely separated her from her fetus, as if she is nothing but an incubator. She has no life, she has no reason, she has no purpose. She is, as we have learned in the way we talk about our faith work, she is godless, she is directionless, she don't care. And that's not true. We just learned that. We just learned that that's not true. So it is our responsibility. And so yes, I'm glad that Senator Robinson lifted this up, but we still got a big problem here where the folks who do the work, those of you at agencies, behavioral health places, y'all went to school for this. Y'all know that this is a healthcare issue. I'm trying to figure out then why we can't move forward, right? So that's my suggestion. We have one more. We can take one more comment before we stop. Yes, ma'am.
Hi.
Two more comments. Yes.
Elena de la Vega, University of Memphis School of Social Work, and I do the poverty faction for Memphis. So, yes, if you're a hammer, everything's a nail. For me, it's an issue of poverty. Who gets arrested? It's not somebody with the means. It's always the poor. And quite frankly, the stress of poverty and the ACEs, the adverse childhood experiences caused by poverty, are much greater than anything else. We're placing this emphasis on health issues without thinking, it's maybe 25%, but 75%, the elephant in the room, the poverty, the threat of eviction. I do appreciate Ms. Scott's comments absolutely, because they're absolutely correct. When we look at who we're putting in prison, why we're putting them in prison, who doesn't get put in prison, because this never affects people who aren't poor. For some reason, we always end up having this tremendous number who are in prison. In Memphis, African American males, and that's the only number that I looked at, I wish I had female students, probably the same, are in prison at twice the level than white males, based on their proportion in the population. So we're incarcerating black males just for looking black, really. And that's a reality. And we're incarcerating black women as well, and we're incarcerating poor women. And so this is something that we really need to be keeping in mind all the time. Always look, is there poverty? What's the effect of that poverty? By the way, yes, a lot of the arrests are for marijuana, which is now legal in a lot of states. And white men are about to make a ton of money off something that we've put black people in prison for and black mothers in prison for. So it is just, I know I'm preaching to the choir here, I know, but still, always important to remember that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And our last comment?
Hi, I'm Cindy Kessler. And I guess my question is, I've been following Sister Reach for a while, and I feel like every year we want to fight the same battle again and again and again, right? We see the same bill under a different name, presented by a different person, and sometimes it comes from our own legislation, like our own people. And like we said, we know it's targeted, right? Because I like to call it targeted, right? Because I think targeted says that you explicitly found a way, right, to like disenfranchise me and then imprison me. And I think that's exactly what happens, right? And so my question is at what point or at what level, right, do we advocate that this is never even presented again, right? How do we get to a point that this type of ideology and thinking from
Thank you. I think that this briefing is one of those steps, right? I think that the reason why this was so important, I asked for resources. I was like, I gotta get some resources to hear from the women. To me, what was really interesting, and we'll get a chance to hear from researchers later, but what was really interesting is that there wasn't, at that time, no research where anybody was talking to women impacted. Reproductive justice mandates us to center those voices, right? And so this research briefing is not only to do that, but it's also to give us some other strategies. What we're gonna go into next is the legal strategy, the legal understanding around this. And then we're gonna have Dr. Bowers come and she's gonna actually let you all listen to hear what came from the legislation. Excuse me, not the legislation, but the research. So I think that the research is a piece of it. We invite folks in this room who are amped around this to help us figure out the best way to get this research on the road and to push it out as much as we can, to make sure that everybody hears about it, because I think that it's gonna be a game changer, because like I said, it centers the voices of folks. And we didn't just get their stories, we asked for their recommendations. That's the other part of this, right? The other part of reproductive justice is that we have to trust folks to be the experts of their own lives and understand that they have an idea of what they need to do to get out of their circumstance. What they are lacking are the tools, right? And so if the tools are wrapped up in expanded Medicaid, we gotta keep fighting for that. If the tools are making sure folks can get $15 in the union, we gotta keep fighting for that. If the tools are making sure that folks' environmental lives are on point and that, and that workers get proper rights, we gotta be able to keep fighting for that, because all of those things are connected. The intersectional pieces are connected to that one life, right? Whoever you are as a person, I can see you, I see that you got a Delta Sigma Theta hat on, but you're not just a Delta. You see what I'm saying? I see that you're a black woman, but you're not just a black woman. I see that you're a eyeglass wearer, but your vision is not your only situation. You see what I'm saying? We have to be able to do the work, and to me, the law is a coward move. It's a coward move. It does not require us to work. We gotta work. So that's my suggestion. I want to allow Dr. Harrison to get back to the airport because she has to keep it moving. So let's give it up for her, and we're gonna move to the next. All right. So we're gonna keep moving because the food is still here. We still want you to be able to enjoy that. But we want Lynn. We got ready for Lynn now. All right. So next we will have not only one of our funding partners, but one of my awesome colleagues in this work, which is Ms. Lynn Paltrow, who's Executive Director and founder of National Advocacy for Pregnant Women, and she founded that national organization in 2001. Ms. Paltrow is a graduate of Cornell University and New York University School of Law. She's worked on numerous cases challenging restrictions on the right to choose abortion, as well as cases opposing the prosecution and punishment of pregnant women seeking to continue their pregnancies to term. Ms. Paltrow has served as a senior staff attorney at the ACLU's Reproductive Freedom Project, as director of special litigation at the Center for Reproductive Law and Policy, and as vice president for public affairs for Planned Parenthood of New York City. Ms. Paltrow is a recipient of the Justice Gerald Lindane Award and for achievement in the field of law and the National Women's Health Network's Barbara Seaman Award for activism in women's health. She is a frequent guest lecturer and writer for popular press, law reviews, and peer-reviewed journals. She's a Gemini, and she's a great mom of two beautiful twins. We're going to welcome her, and she's here on our Zoom, and she's going to take us through the legal portions of this law. Let's give it for Ms. Paltrow.
We're working on it.
We're working on it, Lynn. Mute yours. All right, Lynn, go ahead.
How's that?
Better?
Better. Now it's really quiet on my end.
It's okay. We got you, though.
Yeah.
We got you, Lynn. You go ahead. We got you. We can hear you.
Excellent. Excellent. So you can see and hear me both?
Yep.
All right, should I start?
Yes, please.
Okay. Hi, thank you for that beautiful introduction and all of the wonderful material or harmed by the narcotic drug. So just to point out that in order for this law to apply, you had to be pregnant. Pregnancy is an element of the crime. And interestingly, neither addicted nor harmed were defined in the statute. It gives people a lot of leeway to do a lot of things. And the concept of a child being born addicted has been challenged now. I don't know of any medical expert who says it's an appropriate term. Children are born exposed to a variety of things, nicotine, alcohol, and for certain limited number of medications and drugs, there could be a withdrawal sequence, but addiction, as you've heard, is a very stigmatizing term and never appropriate to use with newborns. Important also that prior to this law, no one in Tennessee, male or female, pregnant or not, could be arrested or punished for using drugs or being dependent on drugs. A person could only be arrested for possession of a controlled substance. That means having some amount of the drug in your possession, not in your bodies, as evidenced by a positive drug test or admission or seeking help for a drug dependency problem. And that's true in almost every state, but the crime is not use, it's possession. So what the Tennessee law did was make drug use itself, as opposed to possession, a special crime only for women. So one of the things the laws also did was it claimed that, opponents of the laws claimed that arrests for illegal use of a narcotic drug, a special woman-only crime, could only be punished as a misdemeanor, which is 1 year in jail. And as I'm sure you'll hear from the other researchers who are speaking, that many women were charged with felonies, a 15-year sentence. You also heard a little bit about this. A woman who was arrested under the amended law, and part of the sales pitch for the law, could argue that she should not be convicted or punished, enrolled in an addiction recovery program before the child was born, remained in the program after delivery, and successfully completed the program. And you heard from Dr. Harrison how hard that might be in a state that did not expand Medicaid, that no state in the United States of America has enough treatment for all the people, male or female, pregnant or not, who need it. How could you possibly do any of those things? And in particular, the World Health Organization, the federal government, recommend for opioid dependency the medications methadone and buprenorphine. TennCare does not pay for methadone, and neither of those are necessarily treatments that are ever completed, any more than a diabetic completes using insulin. And while there are many diabetics who might not need insulin, if they were able to follow all the behavioral recommendations about diet and exercise, nobody ever says to them, that's enough, you don't get any more insulin. So you, by definition, had a law that created a special crime for women that really had no defenses whatsoever, and as you'll hear again, no evidence was really required, just the positive drug tests, no proof of harm, no proof of causation that we know of in any of these cases. And just if you're interested, this is the brochure for the United States Government Department of Health. It had a silhouette of a woman who looked black before. Now it looks like a nice white woman in the fields of Nebraska. But in both cases, they said, if you're pregnant and using drugs such as heroin or abusing opioid prescription painkillers, it's important that you get help for yourself and your unborn baby. Methadone maintenance treatment can help you stop using those drugs. It is safe for the baby, keeps you free from withdrawal, and gives you a chance to take care of yourself. But TennCare does not make it available, and it's highly regulated and difficult to access, even though we know it is one of the things that can help. Now, the other thing that you really need to understand about this law, it was never just about drugs. It, again, was sold that way. But in fact, the first part of the law said very broadly, under Tennessee's law, women can be punished for the crime of fetal assault if they intentionally, knowingly, or recklessly, which means no intent needed, you don't have to wish it, want it, do it on purpose, causes bodily injury to eggs, embryos, or fetuses as a result of an unlawful act or an unlawful omission. We don't know what those words mean, but it tells us that this was a law targeting pregnancy and pregnant women. And in fact, although my organization, National Advocates for Pregnant Women, has documented hundreds and hundreds of arrests of women, all of those were the result of actions by individual prosecutors trying to twist already existing laws on the books, child endangerment, delivery of drugs to a minor through the umbilical cord. No state legislature until 2014, the Tennessee legislature had actually thought about it and ultimately passed a law authorizing the arrest of women who become pregnant. In other words, they said, yes, we approve of them going to jail. No other state did that before, nor has any state done it since. And so it shouldn't come as a surprise then that among the first arrests were a woman who did not use a narcotic drug. She just used an amphetamine. It was used to arrest and prosecute and convict women who tested positive for a narcotic drug, but who were not determined to be addicted. There was no evidence of harm. There are women who were arrested for risking harm to a fetus by driving while pregnant without a seatbelt and fleeing from the police. Anna Yoga was arrested, and one of the charges was her an attempted self-abortion outside of a medical setting. And women who've experienced pregnancy losses. I assume Dr. Harris will agree that none of the criminalized drugs are good at causing pregnancy loss. In fact, relatively few women use any criminalized drug when they're pregnant. The vast majority who do are using marijuana, sometimes with very positive effects for morning sickness. These drugs do not cause stillbirths, but if a woman happened to experience a stillbirth with a positive drug test, she was arrested and charged under this law. And as you heard, the consequences are extreme. Women who are already subjected to surveillance by the state come under the control of the state, whether through drug courts or other criminal law mechanisms. The great news about this law was that even though the extraordinary work of Sister Reach and Healthy and Free Tennessee and the National Perinatal Association and many, many others, including the then drug czar, opposing the law, didn't stop it from passing, but it did result in having a sunset in the criminal law, which meant if you don't reenact this, it's out of effect. And I don't think I've ever seen that in any criminal law anywhere. So it's a real testament to the work that you can do, that Sister Reach has done in responding to these laws. And it is because of the work of Sister Reach and many other healthcare providers, community people, drug treatment providers, and advocates that the law went out of effect in 2016, and I think for now it will stay that way. Thank you. I'll
I was trying to take an awesome breakfast break.
If you could turn the mic on there, that would be great.
Okay, cool. I'll see. I'm beating myself up. Okay. I can't hear again without feedback. Okay, we got some support going. Okay, so does anybody have any questions for Ms. Cottrell? Does the legislation piece make sense, Sydney? No?
That there was actually positive effects on marijuana use for the first trimester. For the first trimester, right? And there was no actual results in stillbirth or residual effects. Could you talk a little bit more about that, like the effects on the bodies?
So I'm sorry, let me make sure that I understand. Did you get her, Lynn?
Yeah, could you repeat the question?
Yeah,
so let me make sure that here. Are you saying that you heard during her presentation that she said that there was potential effects due to marijuana usage?
No, there were positive effects
There were positive effects.
Morning sickness.
For morning sickness,
yes,
by using marijuana.
By using marijuana, and that there was no effect on the infant or the fetus. I want to say the correct terminology.
Right.
And so I wanted to know, one, you could talk more about that, and then like the criminalization
Gotcha. So she's asking about the criminalization of marijuana as one of the ways, one of the paths of this law. Even though there were, we recognize that some women need marijuana in order to induce an appetite for during their pregnancies, and potentially, I guess, some of the ramifications around how this law plays into maybe furthering that criminalization and stigma.
Yes.
Okay, you got that, Lynn?
I'm doing my best.
Okay.
As I understand, as somebody I think earlier indicated, the drug most commonly used is marijuana. And while I would argue, there's a desperate search to link marijuana use during pregnancy to various harms, there really is not quality research that does so. And there are studies that say women report that they have been able to deal with extreme morning sickness with benefits from it. And people use marijuana as stress reducers. I'm not a doctor, I'm not making recommendations, but I do want to offer you that there is other research that contradicts the constant barrage of it must be dangerous, it must be bad. People have to remember that 98% of the medications women use, prescription and over-the-counter, have never been tested for safety for pregnant women and their future children. That doesn't mean everybody should stop using them, but it should help understand that we're very selective about which drugs we create panic around, and which drugs, and who makes profit from those drugs, are the pharmaceutical companies versus other people. So the problem too is most research that has been done is funded by the National Institute on Drug Abuse, not on drugs. So in order to get funding, you have to set up your research with the promise that you're going to find something wrong with them. And people's careers have depended on finding harms or potential harms and calling for more research, which again is not the same as proving safety, and not to say that more research isn't always a valuable thing. But the constant refrain of we don't know, and maybe, and it could, when we do know what poverty does, when we do know what relentless racism does, what we do know lack of expanding Medicaid in Tennessee and other states does, those should be the things that we should be talking about and having panic, or as Cherise so beautifully talks about, passion about.
Awesome. Do we have any other questions? Okay, there's not another question. Thank you, Lynn. We're gonna keep moving.
Thank you.
Okay, so I want to give you guys an opportunity to kind of breathe and take a break, but I also want you to be able to, I also want to be able to allow you to kind of self-manage that piece so that we can keep moving and stay on time. Does that work for folks? So I think everybody understands, just doing a little quick housekeeping piece, that our restrooms are right out of this door straight ahead to the right. Okay? And so then we're gonna go ahead and move into the next section of this, which is Sister Rich's research. And so we're gonna use this as an opportunity to hear directly from women most impacted. And I'm very proud of the work that Dr. Bowers and Jakira Stewart, her assistant, who also works as our youth health educator, did on this piece. I'm also very proud of our partnerships with IBIS Reproductive Health and National Advocates for Pregnant Women for investing in us and in that research that we knew was important to make sure that you all learned of today. So, I think you're gonna have to use my computer, son. That's cool. Let me just put this down here. Can't do that far. Okay, put your little jam here. There you go. And so, so as we get prepared for this next piece, like I said, we're just gonna keep moving. It's almost 11 o'clock, about 1:45. We'll go, and then we'll get ready. So those who are coming up on our panel after that, we will, like I said, it's gonna allow you all to self-manage. I know that this is a lot of information. That's what we want to feed you with. Shout out to our catering folks. Okay, we want to give it up for Draper's Catering for this really great meal today. And please eat all you like, right? So we just want to keep, we're going to keep the coffee going, keep the juices going, keep the food going. But we also want to take an opportunity, though, to just shift into this next piece. So we're ready. So I see we can see it a little bit better on this side for some reason than that side. So if we can just put your attention here, and if we can turn our camera also from our team and our own voice on here, that would be helpful. I just want to make sure that our folks looking in on Facebook can also look right along with us as Risha goes through the research. So I'm very excited. I hope they find everywhere here. All right, turn it over to Dr. Bowers.
Good morning, everybody. So, I want to ask you all to do me a favor and take a deep breath in through your nose and let it out your mouth. I need that collective energy so I can dissipate this nervous energy. All right. So, the fetal assault research project. What was the goal of the fetal assault law? I'll just remind us that the goal of the law was to reduce the use of opioids during pregnancy and the number of infants born with NAS. During the years that the law was in effect, there was a reported 124 women who were arrested statewide and an increase in NAS diagnosis during the enactment periods of the law. So I want to start us off by saying we did not meet that goal. Okay? Just want to just go ahead and put that on just boom, right up front. The goal of the law was not met. NAS did not decrease and folks still used opioids. What were some of the reasons that women gave for their arrest? It included things like giving birth to a child who tested positive for a non-narcotic drug. It included things like giving birth to a child who tested positive for narcotics or other kinds of drugs, but who were not determined to be addicted or harmed. It included risking harm to the fetus while driving, which Lynn mentioned, things like that. And it included women attempting to have unsafe abortions. Who was most impacted? Low-income women, predominantly unemployed women, usually had more than one, people who usually had more than one child, and folks who had a family history of substance use and other adverse childhood experiences. So we've already heard from Dr. Harrison how folks can be already genetically loaded to have certain experiences. And so our research has already confirmed that that is the case for many of the folks who were directly impacted by this law. What was the study? We conducted this study to document and learn from the experiences of women who were impacted by the law and to inform lawmakers, medical providers, and the public about the implementation and dangerous repercussions of the law and similar laws. We wanted to understand marginalized women's perspectives and their experiences with the fetal assault law and its impact on their lives and their families' lives. We wanted to understand what social support services were available to women who were struggling with drug dependency or substance use disorder before, during, and after their encounter with this law. We wanted to receive recommendations to inform policymakers and practices and guidelines for future treatment programs. And we wanted to make sure that supportive services were made available through all of our interconnected service provisions. So basically creating a safety net for folks after this study was completed. The protocol that was used, the protocol itself was approved by two separate institutional review boards, a Union Institute and University, as well as Allendale, IRB, and Regulatory and Technical Assistance. That is important because we wanted to emphasize the legitimacy of this study. What was the design? Between May 2017 and April 2018, women with diverse backgrounds and life experiences were recruited by Sister Reach staff across the state of Tennessee to participate in what we called listening sessions and share their lived experiences with the fetal assault law. Women were recruited through peer-to-peer networking, substance use providers, flyer dissemination, substance treatment programs, online outreach, print media advertisement, radio advertisement, public speaking engagements, and community events. On the slide, you'll see that the breakout of the individuals, the number of individuals who contacted us about the study, as well as the number of folks who came to us that were determined to be eligible, and the number of folks who actively showed up for the listening session. What was our approach? This study used a stakeholder engagement approach by engaging stakeholders on the local, state, and national levels. Key stakeholders serving community members, health and well-being, had an opportunity to participate in the recruitment process from the conception and design of a research question, and were asked to support in the dissemination efforts of the results. Stakeholders for this study included community informants, substance treatment providers, drug court advocates, community-based providers, faith leaders, and community social support navigators. This approach is indicative of the culture of reproductive justice, which we support and apply to determine what services would be best to respond to the needs and priorities of women and other Tennessee residents struggling with substance use disorder. Who can participate in our study? To participate in a listening session, interested women had to speak English, be 18 years or older, have resided in Tennessee between July 2014 and July 2016, have been pregnant substance users between July 2014 and July 2016, have household income between 100 to 250% of the federal poverty level, live in a more rural part of the state. Each person received a screening questionnaire which was used to assess their eligibility to participate in our study. And eligible women filled out a demographic survey so that we could capture a lot of specific information about who we were talking to specifically and some of the different issues that different people were facing. Eligible participants also provided their first name and last initial or a pseudonym, as well as a phone number or email address to be used by study staff to contact them. The screening questionnaire, which you can take a look at the tools that we use for the study on the lovely flash drives that were provided by Sister Reach. You have a copy of the full report, which includes our documents that you were able to take a look at how we did all of our kids. The screening questionnaire, which is Appendix 1, was used to assess eligibility to participate in the study. And listening session participants received a compensation of $75 for their participation in the form of a Visa gift card. A total of 196 women contacted Sister Reach about this study, and 56 of those participants were deemed as eligible and actively participated. You might ask, why was this particular study incentivized? We've talked a lot about poverty today. We've talked a lot about barriers today. It is not, it's no small feat for folks it was no small feat for folks to get to us, to talk to us about their lives, and $75 is not anywhere near adequate for the information that they share with us, but we did want to offer them something in exchange for their time and their commitment to doing this process with us. Data collection. The research staff aimed to group women based on a similarity of experience. Women who were arrested and charged with field assault are categorized as directly impacted. A total of 2 listening sessions and women who managed to avoid arrest were categorized as indirectly impacted. A total of 2 listening sessions. However, many of the women were actively still attending a treatment program or required to be under constant supervision. So at some points, directly impacted and indirectly impacted folks may have been in the same room at the same time. That, out of that situation, developed a group of mixed impacted. And so that you'll see as you read through the study, more information about why that happened and some of the parameters around it. I want to name that as we're talking about this. So, I want to point to the slide just a second to note that focus group discussions were conducted primarily in 4 areas of Tennessee: Memphis, Knoxville, Nashville, and Johnson City, which Memphis and Johnson City are the farthest ends of the state, because we wanted to make sure that we had participation from each of the 4 grade districts of Tennessee. Who are our participants? I won't read every single bullet. You can read this for yourself. But 80% of the women in our listening sessions were raised in households where substance use was common. More than 2/3 of the women were unemployed at the time of the discussion and reported having to have sex in exchange for money, drugs, and other basic needs over the course of their lifetime. The stress of limited finances was compounded by a history of domestic and sexual abuse for almost all participants, highlighting the impact of adverse childhood and adult life experiences and vulnerability of women, vulnerability of substance using. A snapshot of our study participants reveals women who are not only low income, but who had experienced financial hardship in the last 12 months were at risk of further exploitation. What were the results? This is the part I know y'all are waiting for, but I had to drag it out. What were the things that arose from this study? Experiences with the judicial system. So many of the women that we talked to had previous experience with the judicial system for a number of different reasons. Many of our participants talked about their experience with drug treatment or drug court programs. Most of them spoke of an impact on of their health-seeking behaviors. Many of them talked about their impacts of this law on their family life, and many of them talked about the impact on their overall quality of life. So I will focus on a couple of these, and I'll take questions at the end. Treatment programs. From the listening sessions, drug court mandated programs varied in length. Some women were placed in a 28-day detox program, while others were in extended programs ranging from 3 months to a full year. Extended programs offered some systemic support for women to access, and more benefits such as classes. It was unclear from our discussions with women what factors led to the placement of women in short versus longer term treatment programs. In a few cases where women identified and attempted to enroll into treatment programs outside of the court mandate, costs were a significant barrier. A lack of health insurance or other financial resources to offset costs resulted in some women foregoing treatment and continuing their drug use. 3 women from the impacted listening session highlighted the importance of self-advocacy and or having access to resources such as good legal assistance and finances to get into a treatment program. Their stories highlighted the burden of advocating for treatment on their own. And on the slide, you see a quote from a couple of individuals about their experience trying to get into treatment. Impact on family life. Approximately 46% of women in the study reported experiencing permanent custody loss of one or more of their children. The most cited reason for loss or delay in reunification was an inability to get in contact with their assigned Department of Children's Services caseworker. Women who were able to connect with their caseworker and receive a plan for reunification faced other challenges. A lack of reliable transportation to get to visits with their children or their parenting classes, stable housing, or resources to facilitate successful completion of a treatment program. Few women in the study were able to regain custody of their children. In conjunction with custody loss, women charged with fetal assault reported a delay or a complete avoidance of prenatal care, as well as diminished quality of life as measured by gains in employment and housing. So what that means is, again, families were not unified by this law. Actually, the structure of families, as so eloquently stated by Sharice and Dr. Harrison earlier, families were obliterated as a result of this law. People did not have the means, they did not have access to resources to be able to do the things that were mandated and required of them to be able to keep custody of their children. And in most cases, they, like Sharice said, they did not have a family member who was available, or if there was a family member who was available, they were deemed as unsuitable because they may have had experiences with the law or had experiences with substance use, so they were not deemed as a suitable placement for the children. So their children were placed in state custody as a result of those issues. And I will say on this third bullet here that I heard over and over across the state with many of the interviews a repetitive kind of statement, which is most folks, the loss of their children triggered their increased drug usage. Experiences of women who were indirectly impacted by the law. 2 of the 13 women in our sample who avoided arrest under the fetal assault law elected to deliver their babies in Alabama or Mississippi. Other strategies to avoid arrest included having an abortion, avoiding prenatal care altogether, attempting to self-detox. 2 women in our sample were able to avoid arrest because they miscarried early in the pregnancy and therefore had no contact with the medical system. Maintaining custody of their children was the main concern of women attempting to avoid arrest. What are the contributions of this research to our fields of study? Obviously, we would like changes under the law. It says charges, it should say charges. Sorry. There's a direct impact on maternal health and infant care and delivery. So as a result of this research, we hope that there will be some support, additional support and information in those areas of profession so that folks can get the type of care that they need based on the standards of care, as Dr. Harrison mentioned earlier. What are some highlights? Challenges to reuniting families. As already mentioned, many of these ladies did not get custody of their children. Some of them stopped fighting for custody of their children. There were many folks who simply signed over their rights to adopted families, or they just gave up their rights to the state for custody of their children because they were unable to successfully complete the steps that they needed to complete to get their children back. Billings of the mandated drug treatment programs. Many folks talked about their experiences in drug treatment being inadequate and them not having what they needed in treatment. So we need to think about ways to better serve folks in our respective fields. And as I said, there's a diminished quality of life when a person feels like there's nowhere to go and nothing that they can do to better their situation. Understanding the social supports available to women. There were two distinct types of support highlighted in the narrative of women's stories: social and structural support. Some family members provide both child care and financial assistance, while others provided one or the other. Unfortunately, women did not provide details about the scope and or uses of the financial support provided by their family members. But I will say that, sort of echoing what Dr. Harrison talked about in her presentation, the involvement and support of family members was critical to those individuals who stated that they had family support throughout this process. This is a quote from one of our directly impacted folks talking about their support system. So I just pause for a moment so you can take a look at what they said. And then on to structural support. Women varied in their perceptions of whether there were sufficient or insufficient structural supports available to assist individuals struggling with substance use disorder. Their narratives focused on support needed in the period prior to arrest and charge and following participation in a treatment program. So those were the two times, those were two times that women indicated that these particular structural supports needed to be in place the most. And again, just to highlight this dissonance in perception of resources. So just, the saying, if we build it, they will come, they will not come. The truth of the matter is, just because we have a service available doesn't mean that people are aware that it's available. And so if that awareness is not there, if folks do not know how to get services from us as providers, or if they don't have the finances or the resources to navigate their lives to us, we can't assume that they're just gonna come because we're there. Most of the time, there was a conversation back and forth about a lack of knowledge of what was available to folks, and because there were different experiences in the room, different people talked about what was available. These are all folks in the same community, talking about what services they took advantage of, what was offered to them, what was never offered to them, and there was a really big gap between people's knowledge of what was available to them. Again, another quote from an indirectly impacted person about structural support. It is kind of long. Then and now, there were some original arguments that Sister Reach and other advocates made early on before this law was enacted. And I'm so sorry about the size of font. Wait, that's the same thing I'm looking at, right? It looks different. It's really little. But we stated up front, as an organization, criminalizing pregnant women is a threat to health and well-being of Tennessee children, women, and their families. And the research clearly supports that claim. So advocates said that this would happen, these things would happen, and the research just supports. These are exactly the things that happen. Pregnant women struggling with addiction need access to prenatal care, treatment, and resources instead of jail time. Well, women said exactly that. It would have helped me to be able to get insurance so that I could go to treatment. It would have helped me to be able to get these fees waived instead of being locked back up for a violation of probation or parole. Criminalizing pregnant women is a cost burden to taxpayers. We already know that it costs more to incarcerate a person than it does to provide them with services that help them to live better and healthy lives. So, just wanted to make that comparison, and you'll see a lot of that back and forth in the report. So, what were the recommendations? We made some general recommendations, and those I will read to you. Lawmakers, law enforcers, and the medical community, both maternal and behavioral health, need to adopt and apply the reproductive justice lens to their analysis before crafting, passing, and enforcing policy. Again, I don't know the explicalidocious, I can't say it, that Dr. Harrison talked about with the psychosocial, okay, that's what we're talking about. The reproductive justice framework causes us to think in that way, to see people as whole people and not just single issues. This intersectionality that Sharice talked about earlier, we're not just one thing, we're a myriad of things that come together and intersect. The medical community should provide patient-centered and patient-informed treatment. And I'm gonna put just an invisible, but you can see it, line under informed. Let's make sure that people understand what it is that we're saying we're gonna do for them when we're providing services and what they are signing when they're talking about their privacy and what information they're sharing, like all of these things. Let's stop with this just signed by the highlighted part. Explain this stuff to folks. The medical community should include a comprehensive reproductive and sexual health education component to treatment and counseling with information on a full range of birth control options without focusing on or pressuring patients into using one particular method over another. There were a number of participants in this study who were not offered birth control options until they were in transit from the jail to release. And they were only offered long-acting reversible contraceptions, not the full range of options. Some people weren't offered anything. Some people were not talked to about birth control until they got to drug court. So I'm just saying, like, let's give folks all of the information and let them make the best decision for their life. Lawmakers should expand behavioral health and treatment programs that include housing specifically for low-income women who are pregnant and women who already have children to decrease the rate of recidivism in rehabilitation programs and to keep families together. Housing was a critical piece that was named all throughout these conversations. Folks did not have access to housing, and it was a barrier to them being able to get their children back. And so and it was a barrier to some people staying free because they had to have housing as a tenet of them getting out of jail or staying out of jail. Lawmakers need to support policies and programs that provide counseling and social support to impacted children and families while mothers participate in the programs. So yes, we are going to help moms get treatment, but also we need to make sure that the children, the families, the grandmothers, the other caretakers in the household are getting supportive services that they need as well to be able to be the best support that they can be to this individual through this experience. Recommendations directly from the women. Make more programs, and I'm saying it loud on purpose. Make more programs available and or strengthen existing programs. What do they mean by strengthen? Women in our community suggested several actions that the community can take to help individuals through this process. Churches and courthouses could serve as additional locations for recovery meetings. Because if I live in a community where everything is dispersed in very large distances, I can get to the church faster than I can get to the treatment facility program. Maybe we can meet in the middle, making things accessible in my community. So I'm not having to travel to a whole other county to take care of business. Include parenting classes and marital counseling as a part of your program. So if my spouse is suffering from addiction or substance use disorder, then I need some tools. We need to figure out how to communicate. We need to go back and make sure that we can reconnect and reunite. And we do that through counseling and classes. Helping parents who may not have have the skills that they need to have to be able to deal with the stresses of parenting young children, yeah, that's helpful. Let's make those kinds of things a part of our programs. Churches can also make an effort to welcome individuals struggling with addiction and increase stigma, and that's specifically to our faith leaders. Open your doors and open your hearts to folks who have these issues. How am I doing on time? Thank you. What are the takeaways? Lynn has already told us that there's no evidence that punitive measures improve maternal or fetal health outcomes. No evidence, no research that supports that what is being done is helpful. This research is only echoing that same truth. Women have told us that this did not help them and their families. There's no evidence to suggest that punitive measures for substance use during pregnancy positively impact marginalized people as a whole. No, we're creating cycles in our communities. Generations are being impacted. These children who have been taken away from their mothers and placed into these other institutions and other systems are negatively impacted. So we have a whole other generation of folks that we're gonna have to deal with, and we need to do that in a way that is comprehensive and compassionate. More effective interventions would address the complex factors that contribute to substance use and substance use during pregnancy. You heard a whole presentation on how we need to rethink the way in which we are supporting people and treating them. So I won't emphasize that anymore. I think Dr. Harrison did an excellent job explaining that to us about all of the parts of the brain and how we need to rethink these models that we have. Currently, 38 states have some version of fetal assault law, and while the specific details of these laws vary greatly from state to state, the results of this study strengthens our arguments against enacting laws that criminalize pregnant women. Period. Questions?
I have a question and statement, Dr. Powers. The first is, it seems to me, one thing is very, very clear, that the carceral system is the only system benefiting from this law. It is the biggest moneymaker in all of these United States. So when beds are empty, laws are enacted to find new bodies, to fill these beds. I don't know how much fight we as women have left for this same fight we've been fighting. I'm sorry, excuse me. I'm gonna make it. I did a study on male bias in reproductive, in contraception. 6 months to approve Viagra, 60 years to approve birth control. I think we have to drill down a little bit into what the real problem is here. Because I'm tired. I know y'all tired. Y'all do this every single day, day in and day out. And if we will just address the real issue, the carceral system is the problem. It is the problem. It is that we have made money off the backs of Black people. Largely, slavery has not ended. Read the 13th Amendment. So we have made money off of the backs of Black people. And now, the one human that exists to create life, to carry it, to nurture it, and to do all of that, that's the person who we're going to punish for this drug use. That's the person who we're going to. I'm so confused about why we even haven't had this conversation today.
Right.
Very necessary choice, thank you. But we're not addressing the root issue. I appreciate your study, I appreciate those statistics, but what I'm sitting here looking at is that if the state cannot provide health care for pregnant women who are living in poverty, what in the whole hell makes us think that the prison system is the solution
Yeah, yeah.
for this? Who is agreeing to this? So when we have legislators who are over and over and over again passing laws that assault all of us, it's not just field assault. I happen to be a woman. And so, like I said, this is a statement and a question, but what in the whole hell is my question makes anyone other than filling those vans think this is a good idea? What human being who has a mother and came out of somebody's womb would make this decision and want us to all believe, gaslight us and make us believe that our truth is a lie, that I don't have agency over my body, and that no matter how I choose to self-soothe and self-medicate, that you don't have a right to stop my life and locking me up for 15 years or 2 or 10. It's not going to have a positive impact on what you're saying you care about, and that's societal outcomes, these norms, this raising good quality families. That ain't what you care about. You're lying. You're lying to us all, and you want us to believe the lie. So next day on the Hill, y'all might have to restrain me because I'm not trying to figure out who these people are. It's not okay. That's really all I got to say. And where are we? Because before these laws showed up, there were conversations being had, and where were we? You hear me, I'm telling folks every day, this is not okay. And I'm gonna hold you accountable, you ain't got to bite me back. But today you gonna know, this is not okay. And that's where we need to be showing up, in these spaces, at our churches, in our synagogues, in our congregations, in our universities, where the people are who are making the decisions on our behalf. Like, what? No, you won't. I don't need that kind of advocacy. Ever. Ever. Dr. Bowers, thank you. Sharice, thank you. But we have got to start stepping up, showing up, and speaking up before it gets. This is ridiculous that we're having to undo this. Remember what I said. Who's making the decisions? What do these rooms look like that are making decisions about our wombs and our children's lives? Do you know, again, just thinking about foster care. Children who enter into the foster care system do not have good outcomes. So you're telling me I can't raise my baby, but clearly you can't as the state either.
Exactly.
You're not doing a good job. Oh, okay. Was there a question on the stage? I did all right.
In response to what Sherilyn said is that we as a state did not expand Medicaid. There was a choice. There was a choice. We had the opportunity and we chose not to expand Medicaid, which would have given gobs of people access to insurance. We could have made sure folks had access, and we as a state, not we in the room, but we chose not to. So when you ask who in the whole, yes, we chose not to take advantage of the opportunity.
I'm gonna push back and say us in the room too, and I'm gonna tell you why. Our failure to connect one piece of legislation to the other piece of legislation to the other piece of legislation and doing our own work in silo led us here. It wasn't enough for the Tennessee Justice Center to be fighting healthcare almost by themselves, and other folks focus on behavioral health management, and somebody else was to focus on, food sustainability, and somebody else was supposed to figure out employment issues and worker rights. If we were, the way that we try to teach intersectionality at Sister Reach is we just put one person's body there, right? And how do we attend to the needs of that one person, understanding that they may very well have a substance use disorder, they might live in a food desert, and we even talked about the fact, one of the things that Dr. Bowers lifted up is that there were also literacy issues among the participants who took this trial. So some things took a little longer, who did this research with us and participated in these listening sessions, because we had to also adjust for that. So you have folks who cannot read, and yet you expect them to vote. You have folks who, don't have transportation, but we're expecting that they can get to where they need to go. And we are failing in this room to make the connections to the work that's happening at this table and what's happening at that table and what's happening back. We're failing. We are failing by working in silo, right? Audre Lorde says we don't live single issue lives, so we don't do single issue organizing. That's something that Black feminists have known from the very beginning. That's how reproductive justice got here. Because we couldn't just be focusing on access to abortion or access to contraception or access to health. We had to focus on the whole person, access to what that whole person needs. So I just wanted to add a tagline and encourage us to own some level of accountability around this. Everybody, right? Because the moment that we stop doing that is the moment where then it becomes somebody else's issue of why stuff didn't get done, right? So we expect all of y'all to come to Black Folks Down the Hill, regardless of whether or not you're Black. Because if you don't fight for me, and if I don't fight for you, and we live on the same block, we still got the same issue in our community. We've got to be able to bring this work together.
Time for one or two more questions.
Okay.
So I just wanted to say, Charlene, I'm with you. You're 100%. And I will march with you. But the other thing is that this is a fundamental, and you mentioned that, a fundamental issue of body autonomy and of women's rights. And I think that you're absolutely right in that we're fighting little silent battles. But it goes with who has a right to an abortion, should we have a right to an abortion, and all of that. And it is all connected. There is a direct line between criminalizing women for harming a fetus, but you do not have the right to have that abortion or to make with your body any decisions that you want. And that's it. Is it? I think I have to be honest about it. And it is an attempt to control women. It's an attempt to control Black people, men and women. It is an attempt to have one ruling elite, and we know who that is, and then everybody else. And I think we need to address the fundamental issues in society. And it's about rights, it's about autonomy, it's about who counts as a person, who counts as a citizen, and I think we need to start fighting it at that level.
Thank you. How you doing? I'm gonna introduce myself this time. My name is Jacqueline Teal, and I'm a student at Union University. And these are some of my cohorts right now. And we are all communities. And a lot of these issues that I have been listening to, I have never heard of before. And just like she said, it was I only heard of sister reach through my instructor. And so I'm quite sure there's a lot of people out there that never heard of sister reach that would have loved to have came. And so I'm just looking into how you all are going by networking and get your advertising out. I said, if it wasn't for me and my instructor, I never would have been here, or never would have heard of sister reach or the on the hill thing. And so, which is very informative. But if people don't know, how can they go by helping out?
Thank you so much for saying that.
So to answer your question, I think that that's one of the biggest challenges of small organizations is to have the resources for communication and marketing. I think that we recognize that we need it. I know that we recognize that it is a necessity. I think that it is something for our organization and many grassroots organizations. And understand that even trying to take on a project of this magnitude is something that an organization of our size wouldn't even normally have resources to do, right? And so Sister Reach for almost 8 years in this community, which is how long we've been here, have been working really hard to shift all of that, to shift the way that we present, to shift the way that folks find us, to shift the way and places that we go to make sure that people know that we exist. right? Of course, since we have folks who know how to reach us on Facebook, but for all of you in the room, sisterreach.org is our website. We're also on Twitter, we're on Facebook, we're on Instagram. But I do think that you lift up a really serious disparity with women of color led, black woman led organizations in the city. There are over 2,200 nonprofits in Memphis, right? And most of you don't know, right? The other part is that of those 2,200 nonprofits, we employ 68% of the city. Of those 2,200 plus organizations in the city. That's something that it would be amazing if we heard it come out of our city hall or out of our mayoral office more often. But that means something too, right? That we are responsible for much of the workforce without many of the resources. And Sister Reach is quite fortunate to work at the budget level that we are in when most folks are still doing their nonprofits as their side gig, right? And that already lets you know the level of impact they have. If we have the resources that we do and are only able to reach who we've been able to reach thus far, right? And so there are organizations, I'm looking at my colleagues in the room from Coach Payton to here with Cheryl Piggy's Crack, here with Sister Girl. I mean, like, we're here. I've seen some folks who came and have left already with different organizations in the room too. Like, most folks don't know that we exist, right? And so we are working really hard. I can tell you though, one thing that would be helpful for me is for you all to spread the word. You know, spread the word, for sure. You know about us now, and now you can take that and on out the door and say, did y'all hear about Sister Reach? Y'all know about Sister Reach? You know, all we can do is invite the press. We can't make them come. But they were invited, right? All we can do is invite the people, but we can't make them come. And our amazing interns. So thank God that we have interns from Union, we got interns from U of M, we even got an intern from Memphis Theological Seminary that's working with us this year, right? Because of the faith work that we do. And so that's another way. So I think that folks in academia have been able to find us pretty well. But I think that our general public, this is why we're always trying to be out in the community as much as possible to learn about our organization. So make sure that you pick up information not only on your tables, but outside. And now you're all going to be on our mailing list. And so I'd say send it out to your friends when you get the next monthly newsletter, okay? Let's give it up again for Dr. Alicia Bowers. Let's give it up for our team at Ivy's Reproductive Health. Our team at National Advocates for Pregnant Women. And then also our state partners, because again, we did not do this by ourselves. This was definitely a labor that we wanted to lead on. We wanted to definitely push forward for this research, but we did not get to the finish line of being able to help that law sunset by alone. So we want to lift up Healthy and Free Tennessee. We want to lift up the National Health Association, National Cares. There's so many folks who taught us, so many partners that were a part of us getting to where we are. Rewire, oh my God, Sister Song, there was so many organizations, and then Young Women United in particular, which is another reproductive justice organization that's based in New Mexico that helped to make this possible. So while we're doing this transition, I want to go ahead and bring up our researchers, and I also want to lift up in the room our national partners at the In Our Own Voice National Black Reproductive Justice Agenda. Another reason why it's hard to know what Sister Reach is doing is because we work all over the country, right? And so I wish that we could just work in the state of Tennessee, but we work really hard to let folks who are outside of our state know what's happening inside of our state. And because of our presence, I take that very proudly say that because of our presence, we have made sure that resources, philanthropic resources come here. You know, organizations that were never on a particular funders' radar are now on their radar because Sister Reach is here and the work that we do in the country and now some out of the country. And so we're very proud of that work as well. So is everybody up here? Am I still supposed to be up here? Let me get the moment. Take my purse. Okay, so let me give it up to Terry Ann.
Yes, I'm going to. She won't be here. This is Terry Ann Thompson, Dr. Terry Ann Thompson, who you will find her lovely bio in her agenda. She does not want me to read it to you all, but I will direct your attention there.
Thank you. So good morning all. I am so excited to be here, and I think this is the last thing on our agenda, so we are going to be quick we are going to try to be succinct and we're going to try to be pretty exciting. So the whole point of the research panel is actually to give you a snapshot of some of the work that's being done by other researchers in this space. Sister Reach has done some amazing work so far, bringing attention to the experiences of women here in Tennessee who are impacted by the fetal assault law. They've done an excellent job of amplifying those stories and amplifying those voices. But there are other researchers in the space who did that work as well. And so we have 3 of those researchers that will be here on this panel. So I know Arisha was complaining that she didn't get to introduce me, and that's because I want to be very quick. My name is Terry Ann Thompson. I'm an associate at IBIS Reproductive Health, which is a nonprofit research organization which has offices in 3 locations, in Cambridge, Massachusetts, in Oakland, California, and in South Africa, in Johannesburg, South Africa. So we are incredibly privileged, incredibly honored to be one of the organizations that was able to support and to work with researchers here at Sister Reach. It was just such an honor to be able to be brought into this space, especially since we're an organization that isn't based here in Tennessee. But it is such an important topic, and we felt like we would be remiss if we did not give as much to this research as we could. So again, I want to, before I actually speak to the panelists, I do want to draw your attention to your flash drives and highlight again what Arisha said during her presentation, which is that on that flash drive is the entire report from Sister Reach, which means the few snippets, the few quotes that you saw are just a tip of the iceberg. There are powerful quotes within that report that document, that highlight the experience of women who were directly impacted, meaning they were arrested, and women who were able to avoid arrest by either delaying prenatal care, as you saw, delivering across state lines, electing to have an abortion even though they did not want to have an abortion. And the 4th thing is actually trying to detox on their own. So I really encourage you to go to that flash drive, to take a moment to read through the quotes and to get an understanding, because Sister Reach has done such an amazing job of trying to paint a whole picture, right? It doesn't start with substance abuse, and it didn't start with substance abuse for the women who were in this listening session. So that is my quick intro to the research panel, or quick framing for the research panel. I do want to say very quickly, also in your packets are the bios for the research, the panelists here, so I will not actually read those, but I want to tell you who's on deck. So we have Dr. Wendy Bach, who is a professor at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, the College of Law. We have Dr. Grace Howard, who is an assistant professor of gender studies at the University of Southern Indiana. We have, virtually, we have Dr. Carrie Izard, who is a policy advisor at Amnesty International. And just for fun, we have kept Dr. Arisha Bowers up here so that if there are additional questions that you have about some of the powerful results of the Sister Reach report, that she can also address some of those. But for now, I'm going to direct my questions to the 3 panelists that you have not heard from yet, but keep Dr. Bowers up here as well. So to go right into it, we heard this morning from organizations like National Advocates for Pregnant Women and from Sister Reach that they, despite their efforts, the law still went into effect. And despite their efforts, with the law being in effect for 2 years, we didn't see any decrease in neonatal abstinence syndrome. In fact, during that period and the period after, we saw an increase in Tennessee. So I want to hear from the panelists what other results in terms of impacts we actually saw in that period and the period that followed. So let's start with you, Wendy. You recently published a paper titled Prosecuting Poverty, Criminalizing Care. In this paper, you present findings from your examination of the criminal court cases of low-income women who are arrested under the law. Can you tell us what you found and some of the conclusions you draw from that assessment?
Sure. Okay, so first I just want to say thank you to Sister Reach and Charisse and all of you and my co-researchers for having me here today. Is this on?
Yeah, bring it a little closer to your mouth.
Right up. Okay, I'm going to put it right up here. All right, so let me talk about about what data I was looking at because it's very, right, I feel like a lot of the research complements each other. I was looking at criminal court files, and I did a lot of qualitative interviewing of folks who were, from a professional stance, involved in the prosecutions, involved in problem-solving courts. So that's sort of the universe I'm looking at. I also want to say I've been representing folks in poverty courts for 23 years, right? In eviction courts in New York, in Tennessee. So my interest in this is really about talking about a lot of what I've seen as I've done that work. One of the things that I was really, really struck by looking at this law, it was justified as a response to neonatal abstinence syndrome. But it was also justified, and this I will tell you as a law professor is crazy, it was justified by a lot of people as a way to create care. And I just want you to, right, like we're gonna create a law so that women will get care. And I can't tell you the number of legislators, and that's just crazy, right? We create criminal laws because we agree as a society, right? Rape, murder, burglary, robbery, bad things, right? Those are crimes, and you know, we have enough of a consensus, we say those are crimes. But these legislators weren't saying that. They were saying, if we create this crime, we're gonna draw people into courts, and that's where we're gonna care for them. And that's a really, for lack of a better way to say it, a perverted way to think about the criminal system. And I was fascinated by that because I really think people believe that, and that's what they were doing. So I set out to figure out what happened. I had a bunch of questions I set out to figure out. So we know opiate addiction crosses class and crosses, right, and is largely a white phenomenon. So I wanted to know, were the folks prosecuted going to cross class and be predominantly white or not? And then I really wanted to interrogate this link between treatment and prosecution. So for the first question, as to income level, you'll all be totally shocked to find out that only 4 people were prosecuted for this crime, right? Which was not surprising at all, but it gives me a certain nerdy, you know, happiness to be able to say for sure that I know that. As to race, the story was pretty interesting. And when I talk about what I found in this study, I always talk about it in 2 pockets. One is Northeast Tennessee and Appalachia, where the majority of the prosecutions took place, and the second is Memphis, because they are totally different stories. The majority of prosecutions were not in Memphis, they were in Northeast Tennessee, and with the exception of one Asian woman, every person was categorized as white who was prosecuted in that region of the state. In Memphis, of the cases I'm aware of, 10 women were black and 15 women were white. In terms of treatment, again, I'm going to tell you the Shelby and Northeast stories separately. And I talk about this as treatment as a smoke screen for punishment, and then a treatment at a cost, because I think we can tell the story those ways. The majority of folks who were prosecuted for this crime did not get access to treatment as a part of their criminal cases. They just didn't, right? So they got processed like misdemeanor defendants get processed. They got jailed, their bail was set, they pled to their crime, a variety of fees and costs were imposed. They either paid those fees and costs and completed probation, or they got violated and they got more jail, more fees and costs, right? But this was not for the majority of these women, right, inside that criminal case about treatment. That just wasn't true. So, and that's really the Northeast story and the majority of the story. In Memphis, and I'd be interested to talk to anyone who knows anything about the Shelby County Drug Court. If there's anyone in the room who wants to talk to me, I would love to talk to you. Of the 20 women I am aware of, and I think there are women who did go to drug court who were recently, like, it's interesting the different data sources and how we come to who was affected by this law. They were all offered treatment, such as it is in the Shelby County Drug Court, and I'm not going to make any statements about what that was because I don't really know. I know what happened to 16 of those 25 women. 13 of the 16 failed out of drug court and were then punished, right? 13 of 16. That means 3 women completed drug court, right? The rest of them were punished, and let me tell you, they were punished harshly. They spent an average of 62 days in jail. That's pre-trial and part of the sort of drug court incarceration. It's not a sentence, it's pretrial jail and other kinds of jailings that happen as along the way in drug court, their fines averaged about $1,800. Bail was not set in the drug court cases, right? You're just held until you go to drug court. And then those 13 women were ultimately sentenced either to probation, mostly to jail, often for up to the maximum sentence, which was 11 months and 29 days. So, this idea, it's treatment is really either a smokescreen, right? It's just not true, right? Like, this is just punishment, or treatment at this extraordinary cost, right, of fines and jailing, and, right, I think we heard this morning about why it's so impossible to complete drug court or complete treatment, right? I haven't spoken as Arisha has, or Dr. Bowers has, sorry, right, to the women, but I've represented a lot of folks, and right, the barriers are insurmountable. It doesn't surprise me at all that it didn't work. And so, I don't want to take up too much of my time. I'm probably over time. Am I okay? But I've started to talk about this notion of criminalizing care, right? Because I think, it was so great when Dr. Harrison was talking about breast cancer. Like, we don't punish and stigmatize and link care for breast cancer, or frankly for non-poor women, even when they're addicted, or even when they have substance use disorder, right? When we provide care to them, right? But we do when we're talking about these poor women, when we're talking about poor people in urban settings like Memphis, when we're talking disproportionately about people of color. So, and that corrupts care profoundly. And I'm going to share one more piece of data that has brought researchers' assistants of mine to tears. So we went through all the criminal court files and we coded them for whether they contained information obtained by people who work in a medical setting from either the woman's words or the woman's body, right? Or the child's body. So drug tests or statements. Every single one of these women, right, the information used to prosecute and punish them was obtained in a healthcare setting, right? If that is not corrupting care, I don't know what is. I could go on, but I'm gonna stop.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bauer. And if anybody's keeping track, Dr. Bowers told us about some of the costs, and those costs were custody loss. And Dr. Bach has now added fines to that list, as well as not being able to even get the treatment that you were promised, mandated, etc. So now I want to go to our researcher online, and I'd like to see if Carrie is queued up. So Dr. Isard, you led Amnesty's project on pregnancy criminalization laws in the United States. And with that project, you had a chance to speak directly with women impacted by the fetal assault law here in Tennessee. How do your findings from your conversations with women in Tennessee align or depart from some of the findings that Dr. Bowers highlighted today? And were there additional findings from your work?
Sure. Thanks very much for having me. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Oh, okay. That's wonderful. First of all, thank you all so much for having me. It's very exciting for researchers. We've been in contact sort of over the years that we've Sorry?
Mute yourself, Orisha. Mute the computer.
You can hear me okay?
Yep.
Oh no, they just needed me.
No, we can hear you. We can hear you.
We can hear you.
We can hear you. You can turn that mic off.
Okay, I'll keep going. And unfortunately, I missed part of the last few presentations, so I apologize. I can't respond quite as directly as I would have otherwise. But what's really been remarkable to me about Dr. Bowers' work is that the way she, well, first of all, gained the trust of so many women. She was able to basically do so much firsthand recording of people's testimonies, and I know how difficult that is. And I think a lot of it had to do with the care that she put into choosing her research methods, in integrating mindfulness, and finding ways to connect with people. So I really think that's unique and makes her work stand out. In terms of the work that I did, I did a report looking at the issue from the perspective of international human rights law, and I can show you, it's a report that looks like this. You can find it online if you search for amnesty and criminalizing pregnancy. So just in the interest of time, I'll focus on just a couple of the key issues we found, which, as I mentioned, were based on human rights. So we looked specifically at the right to health, the impact on the right to health, the right to privacy, and discrimination, which in different ways I know all the other speakers have already touched on. In terms of the right to health, we found that there's criminalization in the absence of treatment, which very much fits with what the previous speakers have said. In the US, we don't often think of healthcare as a human right, but the state does in fact have obligations to comply with obligations around providing access to good quality, affordable healthcare, and to address the underlying socioeconomic factors that impact health. And a criminal justice approach absolutely contradicts this. It pushes people away from healthcare and reduces trust in their healthcare providers. I also found just a real shocking lack of access to healthcare. People described long drives to get to treatment. And of course, TennCare doesn't cover methadone treatment, which is considered a standard of care for pregnant women. So in fact, the law is somewhat sinister in a way that it covers up the failures of the state to provide access to healthcare, but it's very successful in shifting blame onto pregnant women and those who are facing healthcare challenges. It does this by increasing stigma and stereotyping through criminalizing women. And this can distract from policies that could make a real difference, for instance, Medicaid expansion. And this issue has attracted international attention. The UN Special Rapporteur on the Right to Health, which is an independent expert, has explicitly called for the suspension and application of these laws, and that's quite significant. So another main finding we looked at was the right to privacy. This, I think, echoes also what the previous panelists have said. We found that the route to criminalization is primarily through accessing healthcare services. So meaning people go to the doctor to get help, then they're tested without their consent, and then their confidential medical information is shared without their knowledge, and this leads to punishment. Now, as someone who's grown up in the US healthcare system, I know we all have a tendency to take confidentiality in medical systems for granted because we're used to sort of signing a pile of forms and not quite knowing what we've said. But the violation of this right is enormously problematic from a human rights perspective. We all have the right to freely consent to or to refuse services, and this includes drug testing, drug treatment, medical interventions during labor and delivery, and the list goes on. All these services should be done in a non-coercive manner. And I know we've also heard a little bit about drug courts in the previous presentation. These also raise enormous human rights concerns in terms of fair trial rights. And judges essentially making treatment decisions and healthcare decisions that might not be evidence-based. So finally, I'll touch a bit on discrimination. I think Lynn, back in the morning presentation, referred to this as a woman-only crime. And we've thought about this in terms of discrimination against women for seeking health care that only women need. There's a widespread agreement that women should be supported to have healthy pregnancies, but instead, criminal law like this increases stigma, increases stereotyping, and it also promotes a view that's stereotyped. It's discriminatory, the view that maternal and fetal interests are separate and that these interests contradict. The law also violates equal protection under the law. People need to be treated fairly, but there's disproportionate against low-income women across the state, as I know you've already heard, and discrimination against people who are already facing discrimination and who are already involved in the child welfare system and are already under increased surveillance from the state. And then finally, many of the arrests occurred in your area, Memphis, which is, of course, a county that's over half African American, yet has, or at the time had a very low rate of babies born who had been exposed to opioid. It just shows you how the law is selectively enforced, which opens up a lot of discretion and potential for discrimination and targeting of certain communities. So I'll end there, but thank you all so much for having me.
Thank you. And thank you for connecting those threads for us. There have been so many threads that have been mentioned this morning from the get-go with Sharice and Dr. Harrison, and now thinking about this new thread, which is the discrimination thread, which hopefully we will have some questions that come up about that from our audience. So, you know, one of the things that you mentioned, Dr. Izard, and that Dr. Bowers mentioned as well, is that while the fetal assault law is specific here to Tennessee, there are many other laws that mimic the fetal assault law in several other states in this country. And so, Dr. Howard, I want to turn to you here. You are currently working on a manuscript that examines the dimensions of legal personhood for pregnant people in the context of the criminalization of pregnancy. I believe you've been collecting some stories from women impacted by laws similar to the fetal assault law. So I want to hear a little bit about what you're finding.
Absolutely. Is this going? Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. I have been, although you know, one of the limitations of doing some of this academic work and needing to get institutional review board approval is that it becomes very ethically challenging to have contact as a researcher with the very people who are being impacted by these laws the most, because they are often considered protected classes of people, right? Easily exploitable. People who are pregnant, people who are incarcerated. So on the one hand, you have this thing that it's meant to protect them, understandable, needful. But on the other hand, that sort of protection can also make it very challenging to actually speak to the people whose voices are being silenced. And so largely these stories that I have come from analysis of legal cases, some of which did go to state and federal level kind of appellate courts, others of which, you know, it was a matter of finding a news story that described what happened to an individual. I can talk about the laws more generally speaking. I did an analysis of all bills introduced in the states that dealt with pregnancy and crime. And there are different kinds of these. Most of them are passed using this language about how we need to protect pregnant women and their unborn children from violence. You are more likely to be murdered when you are pregnant. Kind of like a lot more likely to be murdered when you're pregnant, often by the person who is your partner. And so I can see a need, I can see why you would want to have a protective law like this on the books. However, again, it's where that protection bit becomes sort of perilous. That these very laws that are adopted purportedly to protect pregnant women are then, we can pick that law up, turn it around, and use it to prosecute a pregnant woman for her own actions or inactions with regard to her pregnancy. So what that can look like, for example, is if a pregnant person doesn't want to consent to a preemptive cesarean section, she may be cut open against her will. Typically, when this happens, we call it assault. If you're pregnant, we don't. Legally speaking, it constitutes a kind of assault. It can also look like, I mean, this is going to be kind of Frankenstein sci-fi stuff, but it's happening in real life, where if you are pregnant, your right to set an advance directive may be automatically nullified. An advance directive is like a living will. So what will happen to your body if you are completely incapacitated? Even if you have dictated that you would like to be let to die. In some states, if you're pregnant, they're not allowed to let you die. Whatever your wishes. It's true in my current state. So if I'm in Indiana and I'm pregnant and something awful happens and I'm comatose and never waking up, they are required by law to keep my body hooked up to machines against my will until they decide that maybe the fetus can survive. This is highly experimental, and yes, it's morbid, but this has happened. There's a notable case in a documentary called 62 Days about a woman in Texas named Marlise Munoz, who this happened to. It can also look like unlawful detention. So this is true in the state of Wisconsin, and I believe in Minnesota, one of those, where they have this law that's nicknamed, it's this really great nickname. It's called the crack mom law. Nice, right? And so what this will allow you to do is to hold a pregnant person who is deemed to be habitually out of control. You can take their fetus into protective custody, and so the pregnant person has to go with it. Okay? You don't have a jury, you don't have an open trial, you don't have a lawyer appointed for you, right? This is not happening in criminal court. This is happening in the civil system. Right? We call this unlawful detention, but you're pregnant, so I guess we'll have a different standard there. And so, one of my primary research questions has been, what rights do you lose when you become pregnant? Like, kind of a lot, right? I mean, potentially your right to freedom of religious expression, right, due process, equal protection, privacy, all of these kinds of things that you can lose. Part of this is also a conversation about abortion rights, right? We have really, really exceptional treatment. This is a medical thing that is regulated and legislated in a way that no other form of medicine is. So it's not entirely surprising to me, I think about Alabama a lot. A lot of my cases that I've studied come from Alabama, where they do have, there's the Supreme Court in that state basically did what Tennessee did for 2 years, where in the state of Alabama, anything that you do that could potentially have a negative impact on your pregnancy can count as a crime, and from the moment of conception, this is true. So you could be like 2 hours pregnant, smoke a cigarette, and you're a felony child abuser. That's how it is in Alabama. Given that, it's not entirely surprising to me that they're also trying to pass this law that would make having an abortion after a heartbeat is detectable a felony crime, right? But these systems are certainly connected, and I think ultimately part of what is at work here is a understanding that pregnant people are distinct and shouldn't have the rights that other people have. That we can sort of read in whatever our social anxiety, our moral panics, whatever we need to on a pregnant body, and treat it in a way that maybe makes us feel like we're in control or something. I'll quit there. We can get into it more in the Q&A.
So I want to go ahead and thank Dr. Howard for telling us a little bit about her work and for sowing some additional seeds, right? Some of these seeds around just pregnancy in general and how we think about personhood in different ways for the woman versus the fetus. So I want to thank you for sowing those seeds for us as well. So you have had a morning full of people telling you about the assault law, about substance use disorder, about now some of the things that are happening in other states. So I want to take a moment, I want to take some license here as a moderator and turn the mic over to you so that you can actually get your questions answered by this panel rather than me giving them more questions. And trust me, I have questions. But I would like to give you an opportunity to ask any questions that you have. But first, let's thank the panelists for sharing their information. And let's open up for questions. Are there any questions in the audience? So while you're thinking, let me start you off. So we have heard about one of the seeds, which is discrimination. So I want to talk a little bit more about this disproportionate impact that we may be seeing in terms of these laws, and this goes for both Lynn and Carrie, who are also online. What do you think? What are some of the reasons why we see some of this disproportionate impact? And this is for any panelist.
Particular communities are monitored and surveilled in ways that other communities aren't, right? And stigma, right? So we know that drug testing during pregnancy, right, is varies by class and by race. Right, we know that, right? So I often think of these things as feeder systems. So these cases usually start in the healthcare system, they travel into the child welfare system, and they get, in the end, in the criminal legal system. And all along there's discretion, right? Who gets drug tested, who gets labeled. Even NAS itself right, which we talk about as a medical condition, right, when I ask a lot of questions about this, it's a very subjective diagnosis, and it can't even be diagnosed usually for 5 to 7 days after birth. So I don't know who in this room has had a baby, but you probably weren't in the hospital 5 days after birth, right? They get you out of there pretty quick. So if they don't suspect that you use drugs or they didn't drug test you in the beginning, your baby's never going to be diagnosed with NA. So, right, discretion in these micro decisions that are happening all along that pathway end up with the data I told you about, right? Like, we don't look at non-poor women, right? Right? And we don't look at white women when we talk about cocaine. We look at white women when we talk about opiates sometimes, but only poor women, right? So there's just, there's enormous discretion in hospitals, in childcare, in how people access care, and poor women, and in some settings poor white women, in other settings poor black women are just highly scrutinized in a way that other folks aren't.
Absolutely. So Dr. Bach is using the word discretion here, but I'm gonna use the more explicit word of bias, right? And thinking about systematized bias.
Yeah.
Lynn, you seem to want to jump into this conversation.
Yes, thank you. I think it's also the broader context, which is the entire war on drugs, of which this plays a major role, or is an extension of it, was put into place by President Nixon, who thought, what laws can I put into place to control the two groups of people giving me the hardest time, and those are black civil rights activists and white anti-war protesters. And you get a system of policing criminal laws that have from the very beginning targeted black and brown people and poor white people. So yes, there's bias in the hospitals, yes, there's bias everywhere, but this is a structural prohibition. Prohibition never works in terms of stopping, or it didn't stop people from drinking, it didn't stop people from using drugs, it didn't stop women from having abortions when they were criminalized. So they are intended, apparently, as mechanisms for controlling certain populations, and this is just the latest manifestation of it. Even in Alabama, Alabama's law was passed as a general drug law, chemical endangerment of child, bringing children to dangerous places like meth labs. It wasn't targeting pregnant women, but individual prosecutors interpreted it that way, and then the highest court in the state that very much wants to see both Roe v. Wade overturned and undoubtedly the desegregation cases reversed, combining those issues to create these incredibly racist, targeted mechanisms of control.
Thank you, Lynn. I think we have a question at the back or a comment.
I can speak really, really loud.
That's okay, there's a mic coming to you.
Thank you. So first, thank you to Dr. Howard for saying bring them in person. We don't often say that. Okay, the magical green book. Thank you for saying pregnant person. That's really important. I think we forget when we talk about women, there are these soft people, soft citizens, second-class people. But the other thing, and I think a little bit following on lead, is what's wrong with using drugs? And this is a fundamental question. This is a personal freedom question. What is wrong with putting in your body, which is your most intimate personal property, whatever you want? And we never ask that question. I think we should provide treatment for those who want it. We should help those who want. But why should we prevent people from taking the drug? You know, my drug of choice is legal, it's caffeine. I've inordinate amounts of it. I don't care what damage it does to my body. I think this is something we need to ask ourselves as a society. Of course it was to criminalize people. We know that marijuana drugs went against Mexicans way back then in the day, and opioid laws were against the yellow peril way back when. So we know that this is the case. But why even, if somebody can, I conducted a study many years ago as part of as a research assistant in which we looked at day laborers in New Orleans right after Katrina. And what we found is that a lot of the day laborers were heavy users. And then they would get up on a weekday and go to work and do their job and complete their job. They're functional. Why is it our problem?
So I want to go ahead and give the panelists, if you have some comments to make to that, certainly, but I do want to just flag that at the very beginning of Lynn's presentation, she highlighted two things. One, that not every drug is the same. And two, that we actually don't have the wealth of information that we should on the large amounts of drugs, both formal, informal, appropriate, in quotation marks, inappropriate drugs that are imbibed by individuals who are pregnant. So we don't actually know what the impact or the effects are of some of those drugs. So I want to just flag those two things that Lynn mentioned at the beginning, but give panelists a chance if you would like to respond to that. It seems like, Grace, that you have a comment.
I want to talk about meth so much. You know, a big piece, and I know it's on the flash drive, an article that I wrote that is about poor white trash narratives and stereotypes and meth. In Alabama, there was a big freak out about meth that was happening in the context of them passing this law about chemical exposure for youth, right? If you expose a child, if you have a baby in your meth lab, essentially. And it's interesting that most of the people, with the exception of some counties, but disproportionately poor white people were being targeted by that law. I don't think that it was, oh, we're not going to be super racist with the way we're deploying this law now. I think it was still racist, but it's this idea of we need to kind of shore up the quality of white people so that the white race will be really, really good, and that way we can, still remain kind of white supremacy thing, right? But when I was looking at the cases that I was studying, people talk about why they use meth. And there's a lot of reasons to use meth. I know that we give meth to pilots, right? Military people use meth. It helps them stay awake and alert for the hours we expect them to stay awake and alert. The women, some of the women that I saw in my research, if you're gonna work a double shift at the diner every day and then go home and be a single mom and do all that domestic stuff that you need to do, you know what will help you stay awake and active enough to do that? Meth. Meth can help you do that, right? Not saying that we should all go out and start doing meth, but people use drugs for a lot of different reasons. Many of us had our caffeine this morning, right? Some of these we deem, oh, that's valid. Yeah, you gotta wake up in the morning and be smart on the panel, so have your little drug in your cup, right? But others of these we just don't see the same way. I'm fully addicted to caffeine, right? If I don't have it, I get a really bad headache in the morning, right? I need to have caffeine or I'll have it, right? But it's socially acceptable. So it's just to say that this is, it seems really willy-nilly, and it's really, really socially contrived what we deem as acceptable and what we deem as unacceptable behavior.
And there's clearly work to be done to unpack this topic. This is a big topic and there's more work to be done. Are there other questions out there? Yes, in the back. Question or comment?
This is a question. I don't think the mic is on, but can you guys hear me? Is it possible that I think the battery's dying. Can you guys hear me? Is it possible to bring civil suits against individual states who are costing our bodies in these ways, particularly violating my HIPAA, you used what I gave you in confidence and criminalize my choices and then incarcerate me. So is it possible collectively, just like we go to the Day on the Hill, Black People's Day on the Hill, or anything like that, to begin some sort of petition against our various states that allow us to take back some of this agency over our bodies? To say, no, I understand you made it a law, I got it, but here's what I'm saying to you that you will not do to me personally. And these 100,000 women who are standing behind me today.
Yeah, sure. Lynn, do you want to kickstart?
No, she did. She's ready.
That's a great question, and I sort of loved how it circled around because it started out sounding like is there some lawsuit
embryo and depriving them of counsel. It's like specifically to allow locking up pregnant women with no due process. And after it was in effect for 20 years, we finally got a case we could take to court, and by the time we got into the court, then we finally got the woman out, and they said she no longer has standing to challenge this law. And then another woman came to us. So by the way, these proceedings are completely secretive. They're in the child welfare system, so nobody's allowed in. The women aren't even allowed to share their documents with us without a court order in the first place. And we actually had a ruling saying it was unconstitutional. But the state kept appealing, and as the appeal process went on, the court said, well, the woman's not in the state anymore, she's no longer pregnant, they probably won't be pregnant again, so no, you can't challenge this law. It's very hard, and even harder to get even into the federal court system if you're challenging a criminal law. And I'm starting to think, and maybe this will be your next area of research, that really, that the idea that, I think pregnant women are kind of foreclosed from the federal court system through mood business standing, despite the one exception in the abortion context. But building power, petitions as you suggested, organizing to get focusing on a particular prosecutor. It's very rare that every prosecutor in the state is embodied law the same way. So which of the prosecutors doing this? How can you be on their tails, research them, find out where they're vulnerable, find people who are going to run against them, do demonstrations outside their house, saying there is no role for police and prosecutors in prenatal care, in childbirth, in any outcome of pregnancy. So for all of the tools we will keep using, and we will use with groups like Sister Reach. Ultimately, the question is how do you build the political power to do more than embarrass in a state that's not so sensitive to being embarrassed? In places where people are not so sensitive to being embarrassed, how can you together build the power to stop these horrible violations of civil human rights?
I agree with everything Lynn said, except maybe my next research project, which we can talk about later. Maybe. I mean, just to give you a sense, right, that thing I said about the medical records, I am fairly certain that federal law, I think federal law was violated in the extent of the disclosure in any particular case. But federal law is horrible on this issue, right? The federal law allows these disclosures for precisely the reasons we've been talking about. So litigation, there's the communication that goes on is basically legal. Right, so it's about legal change. It's not about suing them for violations of HIPAA, although there might have been HIPAA violations. This stuff that is going on in the system and the extraordinary difficulty of challenging it is almost insurmountable. Although NAPW tries really hard and does really well.
So unfortunately, we're getting close to time, and I want to take an opportunity to do one last thing because I have the mic. So the first is to say that we are a community here of action and not of putting things just on a report and leaving them on paper. So for those who are online, Lynn and Carrie, as well as the panelists here, Dr. Bowers through to Dr. Bach, what is one nugget that you can lift off of the papers that you have written to give to the audience here to use in their role, their way to sort of activate around this work? We want one nugget. What is the one takeaway from the work that you have been doing in this area to give to these future activists out here? When they're talking about fetal assault law, when they're talking about criminalization of pregnancy, what will you leave them with?
The one nugget, trust the people that you are assisting. Listen to them. They have the solution to their own problems. We are there to give them the support and the resources to do the solutions, but trust them. They know how to fix their own problems.
All right, Dr. Howard.
This is a really hard prompt, but I'll say the thing that came to mind to me first anyway is draw a line in the sand. Are pregnant people going to be considered human, or are they going to be considered something else? Yes. Make a decision.
You're welcome. We'll get you later. I would say anytime someone tells you that a criminal law or a criminal system is designed to help the defendant, call them out. It's not true.
All right, Dr. Izard.
Gets worse.
The one thing I would say is keep in mind there's what's going on in this country in the federal laws, but there's also human rights law. So even if it actually might be legal to pass your healthcare information on to law enforcement, and that could be legal under U.S. law, it's not legal under human rights law. So think about it in a bigger context. We have a right to health, we have a right to confidentiality, we have a right to freedom from discrimination, and those exist regardless of whatever bad laws and policies we might be living under here.
All right, and take us home, Lynn Paltrow.
I'll try to make it sound like one answer. Consistent with what everybody, and especially Grace just said, I think we have to reframe, whether they call it a fetal assault law or a 6-week abortion ban, what these laws are take away women's rights laws. They are about removing the protections of civil rights, constitutional rights, state rights to doctor-patient confidentiality, and women's rights. So let's share the reframing and call these laws what they are. They are take away rights from pregnant people and from anybody who can get pregnant. And just to say, you have demonstrated that you can make a difference because you stopped the reintroduction. They tried to reintroduce and pass this law again. It took work to make that not happen, and every single person who spoke out against it, every person who played, every person who did something on Facebook or Twitter or made a phone call made a difference. And when we're talking about trusting people, it's trusting ourselves, and also I think the people that you were talking about, I think we have to be unafraid to ask them to, when they can, when the moment in their life allows them, to be political and to take their experiences and take them and be the person who would say to the legislator, you say you've never met anybody like me. This is what we look like, this is who we are. And that's part of how you build political power.
All right, is anybody else feeling a hashtag preach right about now? Thank you, Lynn, for taking us home. And thank you to our panelists for sharing all of this information and for really just amplifying and centering the individuals who were impacted by the fetal assault law. I really do hope you will take advantage of the information that you have on your flash drives. I also hope you will listen to the call that Sharice gave you earlier today, which is to reach out to Sister Reach, to promote Sister Reach, to think about some of the other issues that are happening here in your state, and to get activated. You have that choice, and you have that now mandate to do something about it. All right, so with that, Sharice, take us out.
Yay. Oh, we can do better than that, yes? I am excited. I am so excited for all that it took to get here. This was a long process. I want to thank personally again Lynn Paltrow with National Advocates for Pregnant Women for investing in our organization so that we could get this research done, as well as Kelly Blanchard and Ivy's Reproductive Health, and not only lending the power that is Carmen and Terry Ann Thompson to this project, but also the technical assistance that we needed as Black women doing this work and wanting to do it and lead this work ourselves. It was imperative to have seasoned researchers on the team, to also to support Dr. Bowers, who we can call Dr. Bowers.
Yes.
She worked very, very hard. And one of the things that happened, Risha pushed back. I was like, we don't have enough people. There's not enough women. They're gonna say that our research isn't enough. And she was like, I need to push back and say, we really had so many women to reach out to us, and don't throw away the women who we got, because their stories are rich enough and powerful enough and deep enough for us to make the case and for us to change the law. So I believe in supporting folks when they push back. And I want to say thank you for pushing me on that, because sometimes I got to get pushed too, right? And so I appreciate her pushing me. and for us in centering the women that we got, because those stories are imperative to be heard, right? I want to thank all of you for taking the time to come out and to be here with us. I want to thank our panel again. I want to thank our folks. I want Lynn and Carrie, the whole crew. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us. This is our second briefing. We did the first one in DC last month. I think that was impactful. We did have legislative support. And obviously, all of the buzz that's happening around this made the legislators in our state take a pause. That's a win. That's a win that we got to be able to claim. That's a win that we got to be able to say we did our work, right? And so now we want to push. If you think that this research, like Terry Ann said, it's on your flash drives. The entire information, not just ours, but I believe Carrie's report, all of our researchers' reports are on the flash drive, not just Sister Reach's report. So I want to make sure, Lynn, that you all know that too. Because it's really important not only to hear our point of view, but to hear these other parts of the story. And again, we're still talking about the same person. We're talking about one woman in 4 or 5 different dimensions of her life and what she needed to navigate in order to get support, right? And the fact that she still doesn't have it. So yes, I'm going to remind you again, we need all of you. It's going to take all of us working together to get this type of reform in place. I also want to take this opportunity to say, invest in our work. Invest in what we're doing here at Sister Reach. This isn't small potatoes work that we're doing. This is going to be in a medical journal. Hopefully we'll have doctors from across the country who will be able to use this data to be able to inform the way that they support their patients. We hope that our legislators, all we can do is invite them, right? We appreciate Senator Robinson for helping to make space and to try to help bring along other legislators. But we want to say directly to District Attorney Amy Wyrick, you needed to be here. You should have been here. Because the DA ran on this as her campaign to become the DA right now. Yes. So if you're going to run on legislation, if you're going to run on a law, respect the sisters enough to come and listen to their stories. So I want to say it. We're unapologetic at Sister Reach on purpose. We're not funded by folks in the city on purpose. Because we don't want to be stifled in what we need to say. We don't want to be stifled in who we hold accountable. And this is the reproductive justice way, okay? Which is centering those who are most impacted and trusting them to lead us into a better way to support them directly, right? So if you want to continue to support this type of work, this is what this type of work is looking like, okay? And it's going to be small pockets of us until we build, and small pockets of us until we build more, right? And we don't despise these small beginnings. We don't despise this room not being super full, because we know that you're about to take this on the road, right? So you are our evangelists, if you will. Let's teach. Teach folks what you heard. Teach folks about what you learned today, right? Lift up the organization. Lift up the leadership of Black women. This is a Black city. Lift up the leadership of Black women. Because we know exactly what we need in order to change our own communities, to support our families, and to be able to better prepare ourselves and our lives for success, right? So we thank you, we thank the Botanic Gardens, and we thank our staff and our interns at Sister Reach who help us support this piece. Give it up for yourselves again. And hopefully we'll see you on the front line. Have a wonderful morning. Bye-bye.
Give you a hug? Okay, go. Bye.
Thank you.
You too.